They say real love doesn't hold anyone back. It lets go and waits. But that night, standing in his small kitchen, holding a letter he was never supposed to find, a letter that would change everything, Ethan Calloway realized he was about to do the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Not fix an engine, not raise a child alone, not bury his father. He was about to love someone enough to lose her. It started with a dare at a dinner table. It ended in a way nobody in that room could have predicted. Stay with me until the end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. Ethan Calloway was not the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. He was broad-shouldered and quiet, with grease that never fully washed out from under his fingernails, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck with a cracked dashboard and a Little League sticker on the rear window that his daughter Lily had put there 2 summers ago and that he had never once considered removing. He owned a garage, Calloway and Son Auto, on the eastern edge of Mill Haven, a town small enough that everybody knew whose truck was parked where on a Saturday morning. He was 32 years old, and most days he felt closer to 50. That wasn't self-pity, that was just math. His father, Robert Calloway, had died 14 months earlier from a heart attack in the very shop where Ethan had learned to change his first oil filter at age 9. Robert had been the kind of man who fixed things not because he was paid to, but because broken things bothered him on a personal level. He passed that down to Ethan the same way he passed down his jaw and his stubbornness, quietly, without ceremony, as if it were simply part of the air in the building. After the funeral, Ethan kept the shop open because closing it felt like a second death. He hired a part-time mechanic named Darnell, rearranged the scheduling so he could pick Lily up from school by 3, and spent his evenings doing homework help at the kitchen table before falling asleep on the couch with the television on. His days had a shape to them, a weight that was familiar if not exactly comfortable. He wasn't happy, exactly, but he was functioning. He was present. For Lily, he had decided a long time ago, present was the most important thing. Lily was 7. She had her mother's eyes and Ethan's stubbornness, a combination that produced a child who would argue a point with complete conviction until she was proven wrong, and then immediately pivot to a different point without any visible embarrassment. He adored her completely and exhaustingly. Her mother, Cassidy, had left when Lily was 2. There had been no dramatic scene, no shouting, no one to blame in any clean way. Cassidy had simply realized, slowly, and then all at once, that she had married a version of Ethan she'd imagined rather than the one who actually existed, the one who would choose an engine rebuild over a weekend trip, who could spend 4 hours working through a problem in silence, who found a kind of peace in the smell of motor oil that she would never understand or share. She moved to Portland. She called on birthdays and sent gifts that were always slightly too old for whatever age Lily currently was. Ethan held no particular bitterness about it. He had simply moved on in the way a person moves on when there's a child watching. One day at a time, one obligation at a time, until the weight of it becomes normal. He had not been on a date since before Lily started kindergarten. This was not something he thought about often. When he did think about it, usually late at night when the shop paperwork was done and the house was quiet, he thought of it the way a person thinks about a room they've locked and no longer have the key to. It was there. He just didn't go in. The invitation to the Ashford dinner party came through Darnell. Darnell Washington had been working for Ethan for 3 years, was 38, had opinions about everything, and was constitutionally incapable of minding his own business. He was also, Ethan had to admit, one of the best mechanics he'd ever watched work. The kind of man who could diagnose a problem by sound alone, head tilted slightly, eyes closed, listening to an engine the way some people listen to music. They had a friendship built on proximity and mutual respect, which occasionally crossed into territory that felt like actual brotherly irritation. "My cousin's wife's family is having this thing Saturday," Darnell said one afternoon, not looking up from the brake caliper he was cleaning. "Big house out on Heron Ridge, dinner party situation." "Okay," Ethan said, not particularly interested. "She asked if I wanted to bring anybody." "Bring somebody then." "I'm bringing you." Ethan looked up from the invoice he was reviewing. "You're not bringing me anywhere. You haven't been out of this building socially in—" Darnell paused, doing mental arithmetic. "Ethan, I genuinely don't know the last time you were at something that wasn't a school event or a supplier meeting." I went to the hardware store last week. That is not what I mean, and you know it. Ethan returned to the invoice. I have Lily Saturday. Lily is going to that sleepover at her friend's house, the dinosaur one. She told me about it Tuesday when you picked her up. She's very excited about the dinosaur blankets. She told you about that? She talks to me. I listen. Unlike some people. Darnell set down the caliper and looked at him directly. Come to the dinner. Eat some food that didn't come from a box. Talk to actual humans. Then come home. That's it. That's the whole ask. Ethan considered this longer than he wanted to admit. He thought about Saturday evenings, about the couch, about the particular silence of the house when Lily wasn't in it. A different quality of silence than the regular kind, somehow louder. Fine, he said, in the tone of a man who was already regretting the decision. The Ashford house on Heron Ridge was not what Ethan expected, which meant it was exactly what it should have been for a family with that name. He had heard of the Ashfords. Everyone in the region had heard of the Ashfords. Victoria Ashford was the kind of name that appeared in financial news and regional business sections, and occasionally on the covers of magazines that sat in dentist office waiting rooms. Ashford Holdings, her family's company, had interests in medical technology, real estate development, and private equity that stretched across 4 states. Her father had built it. Her grandfather before him had built the foundation of it. Victoria, at 30, had inherited the whole complicated architecture of it, and had somehow, by most accounts, made it larger and more stable than it had ever been. Ethan had no particular feelings about any of that. Wealthy people existed. Their companies existed. They affected his life in abstract ways he couldn't always trace. He fixed their cars when they drove through Millhaven, charged the same rate he charged everyone, and that was the extent of their relationship. The house itself was large without being ridiculous. A stone and timber structure set back from the road, surrounded by old trees that had clearly been there long before the house was. Inside it smelled like something roasting in candle wax, and the faint trace of a wood fire even though it was early September and not quite cold enough for one. There were maybe 20 people scattered across the main floor. Jazz played from somewhere that Ethan couldn't identify the source of. Darnell was immediately absorbed into a group near the kitchen, greeting people with the ease of a man who had never in his life been uncomfortable in a social situation. Ethan took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, stationed himself near a bookshelf that seemed like a reasonable place to stand, and began the process of looking like he was enjoying himself. He was studying the spines of several books he had no intention of reading when someone settled beside him. You're reading them in alphabetical order, a woman's voice said, which means you're either very organized or you're stalling. He turned. She was not what he expected either. He had assumed, in the vague way a person assumes things without meaning to, that Victoria Ashford would look a certain way. Polished, curated, the particular kind of put-together that reads as expensive from across a room. And she did, in some ways. She was wearing a dark green blouse, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked deliberately relaxed rather than actually relaxed. But her expression caught him off guard. She was looking at him with genuine curiosity, the kind that doesn't perform itself, and there were faint shadows under her eyes that no amount of anything had fully concealed. Stalling, he admitted, because it was true and because lying seemed like too much work. She smiled, quick and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected honesty. Me too, honestly. These are my books, but I've been standing in the kitchen for the last 20 minutes pretending to care about the bread situation. Is there a bread situation? There's always a bread situation at family dinners. You pick a side and you defend it. Which side are you on? I'm always on the sourdough side. My sister thinks ciabatta is superior, which tells you everything you need to know about her. He laughed, a short, real one that he hadn't planned. I'm Ethan. I know, she said. Darnell told us about you. He talks about you the way people talk about a project they're very invested in. That's concerning? It's a little bit concerning, yes. Her name was Victoria, but at the dinner table her sister called her V in a voice that made it clear the nickname had been installed years before anyone had the chance to object to it. The sister, Clara, 26, with their mother's coloring and their father's tendency to speak before fully completing a thought, was seated directly across from Ethan and had been studying him since the soup course with the focused attention of someone who had already made several decisions. Clara Ashford was, Ethan would later reflect, a force of nature contained poorly in a human body. Darnell says you're a mechanic, she said, not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who had decided small talk was an inefficient use of everyone's time. I own a garage, he said. That's a mechanic who also does paperwork. Basically, yes. Do you date? Clara, Victoria said with the practiced patience of a woman who had spent 30 years managing this specific situation. It's a reasonable question. It's a first conversation question, not a dinner table question. Everything is a dinner table question if you have enough confidence. Clara leaned forward slightly, still looking at Ethan. I'm asking because my sister works approximately 90 hours a week and goes on exactly 0 dates. And you seem like a person who exists in the actual physical world rather than inside a conference call, which I find refreshing. Clara, Victoria said again, the patient slightly thinner this time. I'm just saying. Clara picked up her wine glass. Somebody should say it. Ethan glanced at Victoria. She was looking at the table with an expression that was somewhere between embarrassed and resigned, and there was something in that expression, something that did not belong on the face of a woman who ran a company worth several $billion, that was unexpectedly human. She's not wrong, he said quietly. Victoria looked up. Excuse me? About the conference calls. He shrugged slightly. I did that for a while after my dad died. Stayed inside whatever I could fill my time with so I didn't have to be in the actual world. It works until it doesn't. There was a pause at that end of the table. Even Clara had gone quiet. Victoria looked at him for a moment, not with pity, which he would have found irritating, but with the expression of someone who had just been handed a piece of information they recognized from their own experience. I'm sorry about your father, she said. Thank you. He picked up his fork. He would have argued about the bread too, for what it's worth. He was a ciabatta man. Clara pointed at him. See, I knew I liked you. Victoria pressed her lips together to suppress a smile and lost that particular battle completely. Halfway through the main course, when the table had fragmented into smaller conversations and the jazz had shifted to something slower, Clara set her wine glass down with the carefully controlled deliberateness of someone who had been building to a moment. I dare you, she said, loudly enough that the nearby conversations paused, looking at her sister. To let Ethan take you to dinner. Victoria turned her head slowly toward Clara. What are you doing? What I have been wanting to do for 3 years. Clara was entirely unbothered. You never go anywhere. You never let anyone in. You haven't been on a date since Thomas, and Thomas was... Do not bring up Thomas at the dinner table. Thomas was a mistake dressed in a good suit, and everyone at this table knew it before you did. Clara spread her hands. I am offering you a controlled alternative. Ethan seems like a real person. Darnell vouches for him. I'm issuing a dare because apparently an invitation would be insufficient. Several people were watching now. Ethan was aware of this in the peripheral way a person becomes aware of being looked at, and he chose to keep his attention on his plate rather than perform any kind of reaction. He decided, going to stay out of this, whatever this was. You don't have to, he said, directed quietly at Victoria, not looking up. She can dare you to do things. You don't have to do them. Victoria looked at him, then at her sister, then back at him. That's a very low-pressure way to frame a dare, she said. I'm a low-pressure person. A beat. Friday, Victoria said. I have a conference call until 7. After that. Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a vindicated exhale. The table returned to its conversations. Darnell, from 3 seats down, caught Ethan's eye and raised his glass with the subtle satisfaction of a man whose plan had worked exactly as intended. Ethan took a sip of his water and tried to look like he wasn't entirely sure what had just happened to him. He picked her up at 7:45 on a Friday night because her conference call ran long, which she apologized for, and he said it was fine, which it was. He had been sitting in his truck in the parking garage beneath her building for 20 minutes, reading a car magazine he had brought specifically so he would not just sit there staring at the elevator bank. She came out looking like she had tried to transition from executive to dinner date and landed somewhere in the middle. Dark blazer gone, a simpler top, hair still pulled back but differently. She looked tired, She also looked in the particular way of someone who has been running on obligation for a long time and has briefly been given permission to stop, slightly fragile in a way she was working to keep from being visible. He drove them to a place called Harmons that sat on the edge of the river. Not expensive, not casual, somewhere in between, with good lighting and tables far enough apart that you could actually hear each other. He had called ahead. He didn't mention this. They ordered. The food came. They talked. That was the part Ethan hadn't prepared for. How easy it was to talk to her. He had expected someone who spoke in the language of strategy and leverage, who measured each sentence before releasing it. What he got instead was a woman who asked questions and then actually waited for the answers, who said, "I don't know," when she didn't know something instead of redirecting, who laughed at things that were only moderately funny and didn't seem to notice that she was doing it. "What's the hardest part," she asked at one point, "of doing it alone?" He didn't have to ask what she meant. "The decisions," he said. "Everything's a decision. What she eats, what she watches, which friendships to encourage, when to push, and when to back off. And there's nobody to check your reasoning with. You just decide and hope." Victoria turned her wine glass slowly. "Do you feel like you're getting it right?" "Some days." He thought about it. "Lily's a pretty good person. I think that's mostly her, not me, but I try not to get in the way of it, which might be its own kind of right. That's more self-aware than most parents I've met." "You know a lot of parents?" "I know a lot of people who had parents," she said, and something shifted briefly in her expression. A shadow crossing, there and gone. "It's different." He let that sit, didn't push it. She looked out at the river for a moment. "My mother's been sick," she said, more quietly. She's stable now, but 2 years ago it was very bad. And everything that happened with the company, the restructuring, the board situations, all of that happened at the same time. I just kept moving. You don't stop when you're moving. The stopping is the dangerous part." "I know exactly what you mean," he said. She looked at him. "I think you do." They stayed until the restaurant started quietly stacking chairs at the perimeter tables, the polite signal of a closing hour. She noticed before he did and looked slightly embarrassed about it, the way a person looks when they've lost track of time in a way they're not used to. Walking back to the truck, she said, "This was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She thought about it honestly. "Someone trying to impress me, someone performing." "Is that what usually happens?" "Usually, yes." She glanced at him sideways. "You didn't try at all, which was either very confident or very indifferent." "Somewhere in the middle," he said. "I figured you'd be able to tell the difference between someone being genuine and someone putting on a show. I wasn't going to insult your intelligence." She was quiet for a moment. "That," she said finally, "is the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a long time without meaning it as a compliment." He opened the passenger door. "It was a compliment." "I know." She got in. "That's what's strange about it." Mutt. They did not immediately fall into anything. That was the honest version of the story. There was no moment in a movie sense, so no sudden rain, no choreographed collision. What happened instead was slower and less certain, the kind of thing that builds so gradually that you don't notice its weight until you're already carrying it. He texted her 2 days later with a question about a restaurant recommendation she'd mentioned. She responded quickly, more quickly than he'd expected, and added something unrelated, a detail about Lily that she'd remembered from their conversation. He responded to that. She responded to that. The thread became something. He picked Lily up from school the following Tuesday, and she was in a mood. 7 years old and already capable of moods that had a geological weight to them. And that evening he found himself telling Victoria about it in a text that started as 1 sentence and became 4. She wrote back, "The 7-year-old mood is its own species. I remember inflicting it on my mother. Tell Lily I have complete sympathy, and also she should listen to her dad." He showed Lily. Lily said with great seriousness, "She sounds nice." He put his phone down and thought about that longer than he should have. They had a second dinner, a third. She came to Millhaven once on a Sunday afternoon, her idea, not his, and walked the length of Main Street in jeans and a jacket with her hair down and nobody recognized her, which seemed to physically relax something in her shoulders that he hadn't realized was tensed. He showed her the garage. She asked real questions about how it worked, the financials, the volume, the sourcing relationships. Not performing interest, actually interested. Darnell was there, refinishing a valve cover. He looked at Victoria, looked at Ethan, and said absolutely nothing, which from Darnell was practically a standing ovation. She met Lily officially on a Saturday at the end of October at a pumpkin farm that was Lily's annual non-negotiable. Victoria wore an old flannel jacket that she said belonged to her late father. She said it without explanation, and he didn't ask for one. And Lily spent 45 minutes explaining to her the correct methodology for pumpkin selection, which involved knocking on each one to assess its hollow quality, a technique of unclear scientific origin that Lily defended with absolute certainty. Victoria crouched down to Lily's level and knocked on 3 pumpkins very seriously before rendering a verdict. Lily accepted the verdict. They carried 2 pumpkins back together. Riding home in the truck, Lily in the back seat already half asleep against the window, Victoria in the passenger seat looking out at the fields going dark and orange in the late afternoon, Ethan kept his eyes on the road and tried to identify the feeling that had settled in his chest somewhere during the pumpkin evaluation process. He recognized it, eventually. He just didn't say anything about it. Not yet. Not for a while. What nobody saw, what the evening news and the business press and the LinkedIn profiles and the board meeting minutes would never capture, was Victoria Ashford at 9:30 on a Tuesday night in her mother's house, sitting on the edge of Eleanor Ashford's bed reading aloud from a paperback mystery because Eleanor's eyes had been bothering her, doing this in the particular practice cadence of someone who had been doing this exact thing for long enough that it had become a kind of language between them. Eleanor Ashford was 61. She had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that had, at its worst, confined her to a hospital bed for 6 weeks and permanently altered the architecture of her daily life. She was not fragile. The word would have offended her. But she required management, medications, appointments, dietary specifics, the careful choreography of a body that no longer entirely cooperated with its instructions. She had a nurse during the day, 2 days a week. The rest of the time, in the ways that mattered and that couldn't be outsourced, she had Victoria. Eleanor knew this and had complicated feelings about it. She was a woman who had spent most of her adult life in motion, traveling, managing, building things alongside her husband until his death, and needing help did not sit easily on her. She accepted it from Victoria with a particular combination of gratitude and guilt that they had both learned to leave unspoken because discussing it directly never improved anything. "You're distracted," Eleanor said one night, interrupting the reading. Victoria looked up. "I'm not." "You're reading faster than usual. You do that when your brain is somewhere else." She set the book down. Outside, the October wind was moving through the trees at the side of the house in a way that made the old building make its small sounds. "I had dinner with someone," she said. Eleanor waited. "A few times, actually. The mechanic," Eleanor said. "Clara told me." "Of course she did. Clara tells me everything. I consider her a public service." Eleanor adjusted the pillow behind her head. "She said he was straightforward, that he didn't perform." "He doesn't. That's rare. In your world?" "It's rare in any world, I think." Victoria looked at the window. "He told me about his father, about keeping the garage open because closing it felt wrong. I understood that." She paused. "More than I said." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a careful quality. "You don't have to manage alone, you know. What you've done for me, for the company, it was never supposed to be only you." "Mom, I know we don't talk about this. I know you prefer to simply do rather than discuss. But I'm telling you." Eleanor reached out and touched her daughter's hand with the deliberate effort of someone for whom reaching requires intention. "There's a version of your life that isn't just maintenance. You're allowed to want it." Victoria sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up the book again. "Chapter 14, she said. The detective goes back to the island." Eleanor let her redirect. She always did. But she watched her daughter read, the shadows under her eyes, the particular set of her jaw, and she thought about things she had been thinking for a long time and hadn't yet found the right words to say. By December, Ethan had stopped trying to name what was happening and simply let it be what it was. He knew the shape of it, even without the name. He knew that he looked at his phone differently when her name was on it. He knew that he had started noticing, in the automatic way of someone whose brain has quietly reorganized itself, things she would find interesting, an article, a detail, a moment that Lily produced that he wanted to describe to someone who would understand its particular significance. He knew that when she was tired, which was often, he felt the weight of it in a way he felt very few things. He knew, too, that it was complicated. He was aware of what Victoria's life looked like from the outside, the scope of it, the scale, the number of people whose livelihoods were attached to her decisions. He was a man who ran an 8-bay garage in a small town, raised a 7-year-old, and drove a truck with a cracked dashboard. He was not intimidated by her money or her position. That kind of intimidation had never been part of his nature, but he was aware in a clear-eyed way that they were living in very different worlds, and that the geography between those worlds had to be navigated carefully if it was going to be navigated at all. He thought about this on the evenings when the shop was closed and Lily was asleep, and the house settled into its quiet. He thought about it without panic and without conclusion. He just let it sit there, like a problem he hadn't been given enough information to solve yet. One evening in late December, a Thursday, he came home from closing the garage to find a note from the sitter on the kitchen table. Lily had been asking for chicken soup. The soup was on the stove. His daughter was asleep. His house smelled like the specific comfort of something homemade. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He thought about his father, who had never required the world to make sense before he committed to it, who had bought the garage before he had the money to properly operate it, married Ethan's mother before anyone thought the timing was right, and raised Ethan with the quiet conviction that showing up, completely, consistently, without hedging, was the most important thing a person could do. He picked up his phone. "Are you awake?" he typed. Her response came 2 minutes later. "Technically, yes. Whether I'm functional is a different question. Rough day, board meeting, 4 hours." Two of the members disagreed on a point and expressed it by talking at me rather than at each other for the last 90 minutes. "How's Lily?" "Asleep. She wanted chicken soup, which apparently the sitter made. I'm currently sitting in my kitchen eating it and feeling like someone took care of something before I had to ask." A pause. Then, "That's a nice feeling. Yeah." He looked at the bowl in front of him. "I wanted to tell you something." Another pause. "Okay," she wrote. "I don't know what this is exactly. Between us. I've been trying not to put a name on it because naming things makes them more fragile somehow. But I want you to know that whatever it is, I'm in it, not halfway. I don't do things halfway." He sent it before he could edit it into something more measured. He stared at the bowl of soup. Her response took longer than any previous response had taken. 4 minutes, 5, and then, "I know you don't. That's one of the things that scares me most about you, that I'm not halfway. That you're not halfway." Then a beat later, "I'm in it too, whatever that means, whatever it becomes. I'm in it." He read that 3 times. Outside, December was doing its quiet work on the town. Frost settling on the garage roof, and the dead grass of the front yard and the sidewalks of Millhaven. And Ethan Calloway sat in his kitchen with a bowl of soup and a cracked table, and the particular small warmth of a man who has understood something important about his own life. He finished the soup, he washed the bowl, he went to bed. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel loud in its quiet. January in Millhaven arrived the way it always did, without apology and without ceremony. Just a hard drop in temperature that turned the puddles to glass overnight and made the garage door difficult to open in the mornings until the hinges warmed up. Ethan had learned to arrive 15 minutes earlier in January to let the building breathe before he asked it to work. His father had told him that. Give the place time to wake up before you start demanding things of it. He had said it about the garage, but Ethan suspected he had meant it about most things. The new year had a different weight to it than the previous one. Not lighter, exactly. His life didn't lighten. It just redistributed. The grief for his father had settled into something permanent but more manageable, the way a healed bone sits differently in the body than it did before the break. Lily had grown 2 inches over the fall and was going through a phase of intense interest in weather systems that had led to a library book about cloud formations living permanently on the kitchen table. Darnell had finally replaced the transmission on his own truck, which had been a running joke at the shop for 8 months. Small things. The texture of a life continuing. And then there was Victoria. What he had said in that December text, "I'm in it, not halfway," had changed the quality of everything without dramatically changing the structure of anything. They didn't announce themselves to anyone. There was no conversation about labels or definitions. What happened instead was quieter and more real. She started calling rather than texting, sometimes in the middle of his day, just to talk for 10 minutes. He started keeping track of her schedule in a way that he didn't acknowledge to himself until he noticed he'd moved a supplier meeting so it wouldn't land on a night when he knew she had something difficult. The logistics of whatever they were required a kind of navigation that neither of them had much experience with. Her life operated on a scale that was genuinely hard to reconcile with the rhythms of Millhaven. She had a driver, an executive assistant named Philip, who managed her calendar with the precision of an air traffic controller, a townhouse in the city that she returned to most evenings, and a travel schedule that occasionally took her to other time zones without significant warning. His life operated according to Lily's school calendar, the shop's appointment book, and the particular demands of an older building that regularly produced new and creative ways to need attention. They made it work because they both wanted to make it work, and because wanting to was, he had decided, most of the actual work. She drove to Millhaven on a Saturday in late January with a casserole dish in the back seat. He found this detail so unexpected that he stood in the doorway of his house for a moment before stepping aside to let her in. "You cooked?" he said. "I followed instructions from a website," she said, which was a different and more honest answer. It looked straightforward. "I'm not certain it is straightforward. The cheese situation is ambiguous." "What kind of casserole?" "The kind where the instruction said season to taste, which is an instruction that assumes more baseline knowledge than I currently have." She carried it into the kitchen and set it on the counter and looked at it with the expression of someone assessing a negotiation outcome. "It smells right. I think it smells right." Lily appeared from the hallway, took one look at the dish, and said, "Is that the potato one?" "It might be," Victoria said. Lily considered this with the gravity of a food critic. "It looks like the potato one from the school lunch, except the cheese is different." "The cheese is definitely different. I made executive decisions about the cheese." "Okay," Lily said, apparently satisfied, and disappeared back to whatever she had been doing. Ethan looked at Victoria. She was watching the hallway where Lily had vanished with an expression he recognized, the particular slightly off-balance look of someone who has just been evaluated by a 7-year-old and isn't entirely sure of the verdict. "She's fine," he said. "She's terrifying," Victoria said. "She looks at you like she can read a spreadsheet." "She absolutely can't. She struggles with fractions." "The look isn't about fractions. The look is about character assessment." Victoria sat down at the kitchen table. "Your daughter is going to be a formidable adult." "I'm aware," he said. "I alternate between proud and exhausted." He preheated the oven. The casserole turned out to be fine, genuinely fine, not politely fine, and they ate it at the kitchen table, the three of them, Lily explaining the classification of cumulonimbus clouds to Victoria with the assistance of a hand-drawn diagram she had apparently produced earlier in the day in preparation for this exact conversation. Because Lily had been told that morning that Victoria was coming to dinner and had decided that a guest required a presentation. Victoria asked questions about the diagram. Real questions. She asked what determined the height of a cloud formation and whether there was a relationship between cloud density and rainfall volume, and Lily's face moved through 3 distinct stages: surprise that the questions were serious, pleasure that they were serious, and the particular bright engagement of a child who has encountered an adult who will meet them where they actually are. Watching it from across the table, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something that was so close to uncomplicated happiness that he almost didn't recognize it. After dinner, Lily went to bed with the usual negotiation about reading time, which tonight Victoria handled by asking if she could read the Cloud book, which was technically a compromise of unclear benefit to either party, but which Lily accepted with suspicious speed. Ethan did the dishes. He could hear Victoria's voice from the bedroom, unhurried, actually reading, The meteorology sections, apparently, because he could catch specific words when the kitchen went quiet. Condensation nuclei, convection currents, the formation of ice crystals at altitude. She came out 20 minutes later. "She's asleep," Victoria said. "We got through 2 chapters." You read 2 chapters of a cloud formation textbook to a 7-year-old. It's actually interesting. Did you know that the anvil shape of a cumulonimbus cloud is caused by the tropopause acting as a physical ceiling for the rising air column? I did not. Neither did I, 20 minutes ago. She sat on the couch, pulling one leg underneath her. She looked tired in a different way than she usually did. Not the corporate exhaustion that sat in her face after long days, but something softer. A different kind of tired. She asked me if clouds ever get lonely up there, she said. Because they always move. What did you say? I said I thought they probably didn't think about it that way, that they're too busy being part of the weather to worry about being alone. She paused. She thought about it for a while and then said, I think they know, they just don't say anything. And then she went to sleep. Ethan sat at the other end of the couch. He didn't say anything either for a while. She misses her mother, he said eventually. Not in a way she has language for yet. It comes out sideways. I know, Victoria said quietly. I could hear it. They sat in the particular silence of people who understand each other well enough to be in the same quiet without it needing to be filled. Outside, the January wind had picked up and was doing something complicated with the tree in the front yard. Tell me about your father, he said. You've mentioned him a few times. The flannel jacket. She looked down at her hands. Harrison Ashford, she said. He died 7 years ago. Heart failure, which is one of those phrases that sounds gentle and isn't. She turned her hands over slowly. He built the company from what his own father had started, turned a regional construction supply business into something with actual scope. He was methodical, extremely methodical. He didn't move fast, but everything he did was structural. You know what I mean? Like he was always thinking 3 levels down. How was he with you? Complicated. She said it without hesitation. He loved me in a way that was mostly expressed through expectation, which sounds cold, but it wasn't. He expected things of me because he believed I was capable of them, and that belief was its own form of love. It just wasn't the easiest kind to receive. She shifted slightly. He taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 12. Walked me through every major acquisition decision after I turned 16. By the time I was in college, I understood the company better than most of the executive team. A short pause. He never asked me if that was what I wanted. I think he assumed wanting it was simply what I would do. Was it? She was quiet for a moment. I wanted to be a doctor, she said. It came out more plainly than he expected. Not an admission dressed up as something else. Just the fact of it, sitting there. From the time I was 14, I wanted to go to medical school. I got into a program, a good one, a genuinely excellent one, the year before everything changed with my mother. She stopped. You don't have to. No, I know. She picked at a thread on the couch cushion. It's not a secret exactly. It's just not something I talk about because there's no practical purpose to talking about it. The decision was made. The situation required what it required. But, she looked at him. There's a but in there somewhere, he said. I can hear it. She held his gaze for a moment, and then something in her expression, some particular layer of the composure she wore so automatically that she probably didn't know it was there, shifted slightly. But I still think about it, she said. Sometimes. Not all the time. Just the version of the life I didn't take. What it would have looked like. She went back to the thread on the cushion, which is pointless. People make trade-offs. That's what adults do. Thinking about it doesn't make it pointless. It makes it harder. Yeah, he said, it does. She glanced at him sideways. How do you do that? Do what? Say something true without it being a whole thing. Practice, he said. I've had a lot of conversations where I needed to be honest without making it worse. She almost smiled. With Lily. Partly just living. He leaned back against the couch cushion. My dad used to say that most of the damage in the world comes from people not saying the true thing because they can't find a way to say it that doesn't make them feel exposed. He said if you can just say the actual thing plainly without wrapping it in a whole production, most of the time it lands better than you expected. Your father sounds like someone I would have liked. He would have given you a hard time, Ethan said. He gave everyone a hard time. It was how he showed respect. If he didn't care about you, he was just polite. She laughed. The genuine one. The one that arrived before she could shape it into something more controlled. I hope that means he would have given me a very hard time. The hardest, Ethan said. He would have had opinions about your casserole. About the cheese. Specifically about the cheese. She was still smiling when the quiet came back, but it was a different quality of quiet than before. Lighter, as if something had been set down that had been carried for a while. She looked more tired than she had all evening, and also strangely more at ease, like the tired and the ease had come from the same source. I should drive back, she said, but made no move to get up. Road's fine. No ice tonight. I know. She sat there another minute. I don't want to, is the thing. He didn't respond to that directly. I'll make coffee. You can have it before you go. She nodded. He got up and went to the kitchen, and she sat on his couch in the quiet of a house where a 7-year-old slept in a room full of cloud diagrams, and she allowed herself, for a few minutes, to simply be in a place that felt like somewhere instead of somewhere to pass through. That was February. By March, the visits had a rhythm. She came to Millhaven on alternating weekends when her schedule allowed. He drove to the city twice, the second time to an event she had no enthusiasm for, but was obligated to attend. A foundation gala, black tie, full of people whose names appeared on buildings. He wore a dark suit he'd bought the week before and stood beside her for 3 hours making conversation with people whose frame of reference for the world was so different from his that they might have been describing a different planet. And he did this without performing discomfort or resentment, because discomfort and resentment would have been useless. At the end of the night, she found him near a window looking out at the city below, and she said, "You handled that better than most people I've brought to these things." What do most people do? Try too hard to fit in, or try too hard to demonstrate that they don't care about fitting in. You just stood there and talked to people. They were people, he said simply. Some of them were actually interesting. The woman from the endowment? She spent 30 years working in pediatric oncology before moving into the administrative side. She had things to say. Most people at those events talk at her. I know. She mentioned it. He glanced at her. You looked tired the whole night. I was tired the whole night. Then why were you there? She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and fond. Because I'm always tired and I'm always somewhere I'm supposed to be. That's not a life plan, that's a holding pattern. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then said, Clara said something similar last month. Clara is occasionally right. Don't tell her that, she'll never stop. They took a car back to her townhouse. In the elevator, she leaned her head back against the wall with her eyes closed, and he looked at her, at the shadows under her eyes that never fully went away, at the set of her jaw that was always slightly braced for the next thing, and he thought about what she'd said in January, about the medical school, about the version of the life she hadn't taken. He turned it over in his mind the way he turned over a mechanical problem he hadn't yet solved, looking for where the pressure was coming from, what the actual issue was beneath the presenting symptom. He didn't say anything, but he filed it. April came with rain that turned the unpaved section of the garage lot into something he had to navigate with boards. Lily lost her first tooth on a Tuesday and was very upset that it happened at school rather than at home because she had wanted witnesses. Darnell had apparently organized a small celebration in the shop when Ethan brought her by after pickup, complete with a card that all 3 mechanics had signed, which Lily accepted with the graciousness of someone receiving a state honor. Victoria sent a message that evening. Darnell texted me. I believe he's more invested in Lily's dental milestones than anyone else in this situation. Ethan typed back, He texted you. He has my number. I'm not sure how. I think he got it the night of the dinner party and has been waiting for an appropriate occasion to use it. And a lost tooth is the occasion. Apparently? He said, and I'm quoting, the kid needed all stakeholders notified. Ethan stared at his phone for a moment, then shook his head slowly. I'm going to have a conversation with him. Please don't. It was sweet. A pause. How is she? Devastated it didn't happen at home. Fine now, counting the tooth. She's going to want to show me. You knew that already. I did. I'm looking forward to it. He set his phone on the counter. Through the kitchen window, the April rain was doing its gentle, systematic work on the yard. He could hear Lily in the bathroom narrating something to herself. The tooth, probably, or the gap where it had been. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, just listening to the sound of her voice and the rain and the house existing around him. He thought, I'm going to have to be careful. Not because something was wrong, because something was right, and right things required care the way fragile things required care. Not handling them less, but handling them more deliberately, with both hands paying attention. Eleanor Ashford called him in May. He didn't have her number. She had his, apparently, because Victoria had apparently mentioned him enough times that Eleanor had decided direct communication was warranted. He was in the office at the back of the garage when his phone showed an unfamiliar number, answered it because an unfamiliar number during business hours usually meant a customer, and heard a voice that was unmistakably authoritative in the particular way of someone who had spent decades deciding things. This is Eleanor Ashford, she said, Victoria's mother. I imagine this is unexpected. A little, he said carefully. I'm calling because I'd like to have coffee with you, just us. I have questions that I prefer not to route through my daughter. A short pause. I'm told you're direct. I'm direct. This should be efficient. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. When were you thinking? She named a date 2 weeks out. He said he could make it work. He did not tell Victoria about the call until the night before because he needed time to decide whether it was a thing to mention immediately or a thing to assess first. He mentioned it over the phone. There was a silence that was approximately 1 second too long to be comfortable. She called you, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. 3 weeks ago. 3. Another pause. And you're telling me now. I wanted to see what it was before I made it into anything. Ethan. Her voice had an edge that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt. Something in between, with a quality of someone who controls most things and is surprised by the ones she doesn't. She's my mother. I know. And she asked me not to mention it until closer to the date, and I made a judgment call, and I'm telling you now because the date is tomorrow, and that's closer. A long exhale through the line. What did she say when she called? That she had questions she preferred not to root through you. He paused. I thought that was fair, actually. Fair, she repeated. Victoria. She's allowed to want to know who's in her daughter's life. Another silence. Then, flatly, if she's awful to you, I need you to tell me. She's not going to be awful. You don't know her. I know she raised you, he said, which means she probably says hard things plainly without making them a whole production. Sound familiar? A beat. That's not funny. It's a little funny. It is not even slightly funny, but the edge in her voice had moved into something else, not softened exactly, just rearranged. Tell me how it goes. I will. Immediately after. Right after. Eleanor Ashford met him at a small restaurant near the medical building where she had a monthly appointment. Her choice, which meant she had thought about convenience, which meant she had organized this with more care than she was letting on. She was smaller than he expected from Victoria's descriptions, with the upright posture of someone who has decided that the body should not be allowed to express fatigue publicly, and eyes that were Victoria's eyes with 30 more years of assessment in them. She ordered tea. He ordered coffee. She looked at him for a moment with exactly the quality of gaze he'd expected, measuring, unflinching, but not unkind. And then she said, Victoria doesn't tell me very much. She believes she's protecting me. Is she? Sometimes. Mostly she's protecting herself from the conversation. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She's been doing that since she was young, managing the information other people receive so she can manage their reactions. It's a useful skill professionally and an exhausting habit personally. I've noticed, he said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Good. That means you're paying attention rather than just being charmed. She paused. You have a daughter. Lily, 7. Victoria talks about her more than she talks about you. He wasn't sure if that was a test. That seems right, he said. Lily's more interesting. Something moved through Eleanor's expression. Approval, he thought, though she didn't perform it. My husband used to say that the most useful thing you could do for a child was be genuinely interested in who they actually were rather than who you expected them to be. A beat. He was better at that than I was. I had too many expectations. Victoria mentioned that. I'm sure she softened it. She didn't, actually. Eleanor looked at him again. She didn't. It wasn't a question. Good. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her cup. I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I'm not asking it to be hostile. I'm asking it because I've watched my daughter carry the weight of this family for the last several years while quietly setting aside the things that were actually hers. And I've let her. I've allowed it because I didn't have the energy to fight it, and that's something I have to live with. Ethan waited. What do you see when you look at her? Eleanor asked. Not what you feel. What you see. He thought about it honestly before answering. Someone who's spent so long being responsible for other people's outcomes that she's forgotten she gets to have outcomes of her own. He turned his coffee cup slowly. She's the most capable person I've met in probably my whole life. And she's running on fumes she's been calling fuel for so long she's stopped noticing the difference. Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment. She has a chance, she said carefully, as if choosing each word from a limited supply. A remaining opportunity, connected to something she gave up years ago. I imagine she hasn't told you. He shook his head. She will, Eleanor said, when she's ready or when she runs out of room to avoid it. She set down her cup. When she does, I'm asking you not to make it easy to choose the wrong thing. She'll do it anyway if you let her. She'll fold herself back into what's required and call it a choice and believe it until she stops. He looked at this woman across the table, this woman who was tired in a way she refused to show, who had clearly been thinking about this conversation for longer than he had, who loved her daughter in the way of someone who knew exactly how they had failed her and was trying to make some small correction while there was still time. I won't make it easy, he said. Good. Eleanor picked up her cup again. Now, Darnell tells me your garage has a remarkable turnaround time on transmission work. The shift was so abrupt he almost smiled. He's been talking to you too? Darnell talks to everyone, Eleanor said, with a composure that suggested she found this entirely reasonable. He's a very useful person. Ethan laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, and Eleanor Ashford permitted herself a small, satisfied smile that lasted exactly 3 seconds before she returned to the expression of a woman who had important things to discuss. He drove back to Millhaven that afternoon with the windows down despite the May cold, the town opening up around him as he came down the ridge road, the familiar shape of the water tower and the grain elevator, and the steeple of the old Methodist church on 4th Street. The garage roof came into view. His name on the sign, faded a little from last winter, one of the letters slightly crooked from the wind. He pulled into the lot and sat in the truck for a minute before going in. He texted Victoria. Coffee with your mother. She's formidable. Victoria's response came in under a minute. Are you intact? Intact. She asked good questions. She always does. That's the problem with her. She loves you. A longer pause. Then, I know. That's also the problem. He pocketed his phone and went inside. Darnell was working on a brake line and didn't look up. How'd it go? How do you know everything? I pay attention. Darnell reached for a wrench. How'd it go? Fine. Ethan picked up the afternoon's appointment sheet. She brought up something Victoria hasn't told me yet. Did you ask what it was? No. Darnell glanced at him. You're not going to push. I'm not going to push. Darnell made a sound that was not a word, but communicated clearly. He returned to the brake line. Ethan stood at the counter for a moment, looking at the afternoon schedule without really reading it, and thought about what Eleanor had said. A remaining opportunity, the particular care with which she had chosen those words, as if she had been holding them for a long time and wanted to set them down precisely. He thought about Victoria on his couch in January, picking at the thread of the cushion, saying, I still think about it in the voice of someone admitting to something they've decided is no longer worth admitting. He thought about the way she'd gone quiet when he'd said there's a but in there somewhere, and how she'd held his gaze for a moment before letting the thing through. He set down the appointment sheet. He went out to the shop floor and found a car waiting and put on his gloves and got to work, because the car was real, and the problem was solvable, and there were things you could hold in your hands and things you had to hold in your mind, and both required care, and both required patience, and both, eventually, required the willingness to do the harder thing when it arrived. It arrived in June, not the way he expected, not the way anyone would have predicted, but it arrived the way most things do, through a door that was already open, in a quiet moment, when his hands were full of something else entirely. Victoria had left her jacket at his house on a Sunday visit. He found it on the hook by the door Monday morning, meaning to text her about it before the day started. He picked it up to move it, and something slipped out of the inner pocket and fell to the floor. A folded envelope, cream-colored, with the insignia of a medical institution printed in the upper left corner. Official. Heavy paper. Opened at one end, then folded and replaced. The kind of thing you read and put away because you weren't ready to decide what to do about it yet. He stood in the hallway with the envelope in his hand and the jacket over his arm, and he stood there long enough that Lily called from the kitchen, asking if he was coming for breakfast. "Coming," he said. He set the envelope on the counter. He did not open it. He made Lily's oatmeal and got her ready for school and drove her there and came back to the house and stood in the kitchen and looked at the envelope for a long time. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again. He texted, "You left your jacket. There's something in the pocket." Her response took 11 minutes. That was how he knew she knew what it was. "I'll come get it this week." He stared at that message. He typed back, "Victoria." He stopped. He deleted it. He typed, "Okay." He put his phone in his pocket and drove to the garage and worked through the morning with the particular focused silence of someone who has turned a problem over enough times to know that forcing it doesn't help, that the right pressure, in the right place, at the right time, was its own skill. She came Thursday evening. She came alone, parked in the driveway, knocked on the door even though she had never knocked before. He opened it. She had her keys in her hand and her work face on. Composed, measured, prepared. He handed her the jacket. She took it. She stood on the doorstep. "Come in," he said. "Victoria, come in." She came in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table, the same chairs, the same cracked surface he'd been meaning to refinish for 2 years, and put the jacket in her lap and said nothing for a moment. Lily was at Darnell's sister's house. The evening was quiet. From outside came the June sound of the neighborhood settling into itself. A lawnmower somewhere distant, a screen door, a dog. "I've been deferred 3 times, she said finally to the table. "The program holds a provisional admission for exceptional cases, life circumstances, documented hardship." She smoothed the front of the jacket with one hand. "I have one remaining window. If I don't claim it by the end of this year, communicate formal intent. The admission expires." They've been more patient than they had any obligation to be. Ethan sat across from her and didn't say anything. "I had this plan," she continued, "where I would tell you about it at some point when it felt like the right time, and then I would explain that the window had passed and it wasn't relevant anymore, and we would just move on." She finally looked up. "I didn't plan on you finding the letter before I could do that. How long have you been carrying it in your jacket?" She blinked. 3 weeks. Victoria. "I know." She pressed her lips together. "I know how that sounds." He leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "Tell me what you want," he said. "Not what's practical, not what the company needs, not what your mother needs. What do you actually want?" She held his gaze. The question sat between them. "I want to be a doctor," she said. It was the same quiet plainness as January, except this time it was also something else, something that had been folded up for a very long time and was now open in a kitchen in a small town with someone who had asked the actual question. I have wanted it since I was 14 years old, and I have spent the last 7 years managing that want like it was a business liability instead of a. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Instead of something that's yours, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, he said. She looked down at her jacket. She was quiet for a moment. It would mean leaving, she said. The program is not here. It's not nearby. It would be time. Real time. I'd have to restructure my role, find interim leadership, manage the transition of my mother's care situation, reorganize. She stopped herself. I'm doing the liability thing again. You are, he agreed. It's a reflex. I know. She looked up, and he saw it then. What was underneath the composure and the calculation, what sat below all of it. Not fear, exactly. Fear would have been simpler. It was something more specific. The particular vulnerability of someone who has not let themselves want something for so long that wanting it again feels like standing at the edge of something very high. What do you do? She said quietly, when the right thing and the safe thing are not the same thing. He looked at this woman at his kitchen table, holding a jacket with a letter in the pocket. 7 years of deferred dreams and real love and complicated duty all visible at once. And he thought about his father, about what it means to show up completely, about what it means to actually love someone versus simply needing them close. He had already started to understand what he was going to have to do. He just wasn't ready to say it yet. Not tonight. Tonight, the most honest thing he could offer her was the truth of what he saw. I think, he said carefully, that you already know the answer. You've known it for a while. You're just waiting to find out if the people who love you will let you act on it. She was very still. We will, he said. She looked at him for a long time in the June evening quiet of a kitchen in Millhaven, and he looked back at her. Neither of them moved. Outside, the lawnmower had stopped. The neighborhood had gone into the specific hush of an early summer evening, the kind that sits between daylight and dark and asks nothing of anyone. Somewhere down the block, a kid was riding a bicycle. The screen door opened and closed at the house next door. The letter was still in the jacket. The jacket was still in her lap. The question was still between them, and they were both still sitting with it, because some things cannot and should not be rushed. And what was happening in that kitchen on that Thursday evening in June was one of them. She left that Thursday without making any decision. That was the honest version. She took the jacket, said goodnight in the careful voice of someone maintaining the structural integrity of a thing they're not ready to examine, and drove back to the city with the letter still in the inner pocket and the conversation still in her chest like a stone she was trying to breathe around. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched the taillights of her car disappear at the end of the block, and then went back inside and washed the 2 coffee cups they'd used and turned off the kitchen light and sat on the couch in the dark for a while, not thinking exactly, just sitting with it. He had said we will. He had meant it. He also knew, with the particular clarity of a man who has fixed enough things to understand the difference between a problem and a situation, that meaning it and being ready for what it required were 2 different things he hadn't fully reconciled yet. The following 2 weeks had a surface normalcy that neither of them acknowledged as constructed. They talked on the phone. She texted about a board issue that was consuming her Tuesday. He sent a photo of Lily's latest cloud diagram, which had expanded to include precipitation cycles and had taken over a full section of the refrigerator door. Victoria responded with a string of genuine questions about the diagram and a separate message that said only, "She's going to be something remarkable." He typed back, "She already is." The exchange was warm and real and also, underneath, slightly careful. The way 2 people are careful when something large is sitting between them, and they've agreed, without saying so, to give it a little more time before picking it up again. Clara called him on a Wednesday morning, which was unexpected enough that he pulled the truck over to take the call. "She told me about the letter," Clara said, without preamble. "Well, she didn't tell me. I found it on her counter when I stopped by her place Monday, and I asked her directly, and she told me, which is the closest thing to voluntary disclosure you're going to get from Victoria." "Okay," Ethan said. "I'm calling because I want to know where you stand, not because I'm going to interfere. I've been accused of interfering, and I'm trying to be more intentional about it. I'm asking because I want to understand the whole picture." "Where I stand," he repeated. "Yes." He looked out at the road ahead. A truck passed going the other direction. I think she should go, he said. I've thought that since I found out there was something to go to, even before I knew what it was. Clara was quiet for a second. You understand what that means, practically speaking. I understand. Long distance, whatever that looks like. Restructuring everything. It's not simple, Ethan. I know it's not simple. And you still think she should go? Yes. Another pause. When Clara spoke again, her voice had shifted, lost the interrogative quality, become something more direct and less armored. She's scared, she said. Not of the program. She's not scared of the work. She never has been. She's scared that wanting it means she's been failing everyone who needed her here. She's built this whole story where her sacrifice is the thing holding everything together, and the idea of dismantling that story it's not just practical for her. It's identity level. I know, he said. I've been watching her carry that for months. She'll fight you on it. She'll find reasons. She's very good at finding reasons. I know that too. And you're still, Clara. He put his hand on the steering wheel. I'm not going anywhere. But I'm not going to make it easy for her to choose the wrong thing either. Your mother said something similar. A longer pause. My mother talked to you. Back in May. Of course she did. Clara exhaled. The two of them. They never talk directly to each other about the things that matter, but they'll both go around through you. A short, complicated laugh. Welcome to the Ashford family, Ethan. We process our feelings through proxies. I noticed. Are you okay with that? He thought about it genuinely. I'm okay with being useful, he said. That's different from being a proxy, but I'll take it. After the call, he drove to the shop and worked through the morning with the kind of focused physical attention that had always been his way of managing the things his mind couldn't solve by thinking. An engine teardown, a brake replacement, a transmission assessment that turned out to be simpler than the customer had feared and for which Ethan charged accordingly, because overcharging people for work they didn't need was a thing his father had specifically said was worse than lying, and that position had installed itself permanently. It was in the middle of that afternoon, elbow deep in the engine of a Chevy that had been running rough for 3,000 miles, and whose owner had been ignoring it for most of that time, that Darnell said from the next bay over, She's coming Saturday. Ethan didn't look up. I know. She sounded different on the phone. You talked to her. She called me. A pause. I think she needed to talk to someone who wasn't you or her family. Ethan straightened up and looked at him. What did she say? Darnell set down his wrench and gave him the measured look of a man choosing his words. She said she didn't know how to want something without it feeling like she was taking it from someone else. He picked the wrench back up. I told her that was the most Ashford thing I'd ever heard. What did she say to that? She laughed, and then she was quiet for a while. And then she said she thought you were going to tell her to go, and she didn't know what to do with that. Darnell reached back into the engine bay. I told her the thing to do with it was believe it. Ethan looked at him for a moment. When did you get wise? I've always been wise. You just don't pay attention. Darnell didn't look up. She's coming Saturday. Be home when she gets there. He was home. He was there at 11 in the morning when her car pulled up, and he had done nothing to prepare for the conversation he knew was coming, except make sure Lily was at a play date and there was coffee ready and the kitchen table was clear. He had learned in the past year that Victoria talked better when she had something to look at that wasn't a person, when she could speak to the middle distance and feel less observed. The kitchen table was good for that. The river had been good for that, on their first date. The couch in January. She came in and sat down and accepted coffee and wrapped her hands around the mug and looked at the table and said, I requested the formal documentation last week, from the program, just to have it. I haven't sent anything back. I just wanted to see the actual terms. Okay, he said. The timeline is specific. They need my intent communicated before the end of August. Enrollment would begin the following January. She traced the rim of the mug with one finger. The program is in Harrington. That's 4 hours, he said. 4 hours and 20 minutes. She looked up. You know where Harrington is? I looked it up. She held his gaze. When? Week after you left. After I found the letter. She was quiet for a moment. You've been sitting with this for a month. We've both been sitting with it. She nodded slowly. Outside the window, the July morning was bright and indifferent to the conversation happening in the kitchen. Birds on the wire, a car going slow down the street, a kid on a bike. The ordinary Saturday furniture of the neighborhood. Tell me the real version, Ethan said. Not the managed version. What's actually in your head? She pressed her lips together, looked at the table again, and then, with the visible effort of someone lowering a weight they've been holding at shoulder height for too long. I keep doing the math, she said, on everyone who needs something from me. My mother, she's more stable now, but stable isn't independent, and the care structure we have works because I'm close enough to troubleshoot when it doesn't. The company, there's a transition happening with 2 of our portfolio entities that's going to require hands-on leadership for at least the next 6 months. Clara tries, but she doesn't have the... She stopped herself. And then there's you and Lily. Her voice changed slightly on Lily's name. I keep putting all of that on one side of the scale and the program on the other side, and the scale doesn't... That's the wrong scale, he said. She looked at him. You're measuring your want against everyone else's need, he said. That's a scale that will never balance in your favor. It's designed not to. He set his cup down. The right question isn't whether you can afford to go. It's whether everyone else can afford to let you stay when you shouldn't be staying. That's a philosophical distinction. It's a practical one. He leaned forward. Your mother is not held together by your proximity. You believe she is, but she's not. The company is not held together by your personal attendance at every problem. You believe it is, because you've made yourself the solution to every problem, and now you can't tell the difference between what actually needs you and what you've just never let anyone else handle. He paused. And Lily and I... Don't, she said. It came out more sharply than she intended. She set down her cup. Don't tell me not to factor you in. You're not nothing, Ethan. You and Lily are not a calculation I can just... I'm not asking you to factor us out, he said. I'm telling you we're not the reason to stay. If you stay for us, you'll end up resenting it. Not right away. Maybe not for years, but eventually you'll be 60 years old and wonder, and that wondering will cost you more than leaving ever would. She stared at him. How are you... She stopped, started again. How are you this calm about this? I'm not calm, he said. I've been losing sleep over this for a month, but losing sleep about something doesn't change what the right answer is. She pushed back from the table slightly, not enough to stand, just enough to put air between herself and the conversation. She put her hands in her lap. She looked out the window. A long moment passed, 30 seconds, maybe more, with only the ambient sound of the Saturday morning filling the kitchen. My father, she said finally. The last real conversation I had with him before he died. We were in his office, going through the succession structure, and he stopped in the middle of a sentence about the portfolio breakdown, and he looked at me and he said, You're going to be excellent at this, V. I just want you to know that I know that's not the only thing you would have been excellent at. She paused. And then he went back to the portfolio breakdown, and he never said it again. Ethan said nothing. He waited. I've been thinking about that sentence for 7 years, she said, about what he meant, whether he was apologizing or just observing, whether he knew he was asking me to give something up, or whether he thought he was just describing a fact. She turned to look at him. I never got to ask him. What do you think he would say now? She considered that. Her jaw moved slightly. I think he'd say go, she said. I think he'd say he built the company to last, not to need me specifically. I think he'd say the most Ashford thing you can do is take the hard choice when the easy one is available. She exhaled. I think he'd be better at saying that now than he was when he was alive. Then go, Ethan said. Simply. The same way he'd said true things before. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the particular way of someone who is not going to cry but is very close to the territory of it. Just like that. Not just like that, he said. It's going to be hard and complicated, and there are going to be months where everything is difficult and the distance is worse than you planned for. I know that. You know that. He held her gaze. But I'm not going to be the reason you don't go. And I'm not going to pretend that asking you to stay would be love. It would be, he paused. It would be me choosing my comfort over your life. I'm not doing that. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time, the way she had looked at him on that first date when he'd said something honest before she expected it, with the slight, off-balance quality of a person who hasn't been handed the thing they prepared for and doesn't yet know what to do with what they got instead. I don't deserve you, she said. That's not the right framework, he said. You're the most… She stopped, started differently. Do you know what it's like to spend your whole adult life in rooms full of people who want something from you and then find the one person who is actively pushing you toward the door? I'm not pushing you toward the door, he said. I'm pushing you toward yours. There's a difference. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, looked at the ceiling, took a breath. When she looked back at him, her expression had changed. The composure was still there. It was always there. But beneath it, something had settled, the way silt settles after water has been disturbed. Something was quieter. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, I need to think about the actual logistics. If this is something I'm genuinely considering… She straightened in her chair slightly, and he could see it happening in real time, the part of her that handled things engaging, the competent machinery of her attention turning toward the actual problem. The company situation is the most complicated piece. Marcus Chen has been my COO for 4 years. He can handle operational decisions. But the board dynamics around the Kellerton acquisition are… There's a personality conflict between 2 of the directors that I've been personally managing, and if I remove myself from that equation before it resolves… How long would it take to resolve if you forced it instead of managing around it? She blinked. What? The director conflict. You've been managing around it. What happens if you make them resolve it directly instead of routing it through you? A pause. Someone probably says something they can't take back. And then it's resolved. Ethan, board dynamics are more… I'm not saying it's tidy. I'm saying you've been the buffer because you're there to be the buffer. If you're not there, they either work it out or it surfaces and gets handled structurally. Either way, it doesn't require you specifically. He watched her process this. What else? She gave him a look that was somewhere between irritated and reluctantly impressed. Marcus would need a supplementary support structure, someone with portfolio-level experience who can advise him on the decisions I've been handling informally. There's a woman, Diane Reeves. She was CFO at Hartfield Group before she retired. She knows our sector. She owes me a conversation. Call in the conversation. My mother's care. What would it take to make that structure work without you as the emergency backstop? Victoria was quiet for a moment, visibly calculating. A second nurse. A better system for her medication management. The current setup relies on me checking in informally, which is inefficient. And Clara would need to actually commit to being the point person for the family piece, rather than delegating it upward to me every time something gets hard. Would Clara do that? If I asked her directly. Not if I imply she should. Not if I set up a system and hope she steps into it. I would have to ask her explicitly and then hold the line when she pushes back. Can you do that? She thought about it honestly. I can do that, she said. I've just never made her do it because it was easier to handle it myself. Easier for who? She opened her mouth, closed it. For everyone in the short term, she admitted. And for you, in every term, he said. Because if you're handling it, you're in control of it. And you like being in control because the alternative is trusting people to do things you can't supervise. She looked at him with an expression that was not entirely comfortable. That's very specific. You're a very specific person. He wasn't saying it unkindly, just truthfully. And it's a good quality most of the time. But it's also the thing that has you convinced that every system in your life is load-bearing specifically because you're the one holding it. She was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee cup, looked at the window. There's one more thing, she said. Her voice had changed again, quieter, the calculated quality gone. This was a different register. I haven't let myself say this out loud yet. Then say it. She looked at him directly. I'm terrified, she said. Of the program, of going back to being a student, of being 30 years old in a room full of people who are 22 and having never done the thing I spent 10 years telling myself I was going to do. of being bad at it. She paused. I've been competent at things for so long that I don't know what I do if I'm not competent. The company was hard, but I had a template. My father's structure, the institutional knowledge, the team. Medicine has no template I can borrow. It's just me and what I actually know. And I don't know what I actually know anymore, apart from the business. You know more than you think, he said. That's a nice thing to say. I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because you spent the last 20 minutes mapping out a corporate transition strategy in real time, off the top of your head, identifying the pressure points and the personnel solutions, and doing it while you were emotionally compromised. He kept his eyes on her. You're not someone who doesn't know what they know. You're someone who's forgotten how to trust it outside of familiar territory. She held his gaze. Something in her expression moved. Not dramatically, not visibly enough that anyone watching from the outside would have caught it, but he caught it. He had spent enough time paying attention to her to catch things that other people missed. Medical school, she said, and it came out like she was testing the weight of it. Hearing what it sounded like when she actually said it without qualification, without historical context, without the implicit apology that usually preceded it, just the two words, just the thing. Medical school, he said back. She exhaled. Okay. Okay, you're going? Okay, I'm going to stop arguing against it in my head for 5 minutes and see what that feels like. She almost smiled, but it didn't quite make it. That's where I am right now. That's enough for right now. She looked at him across the kitchen table. This man in his house in his small town with his grease-stained hands and his cracked table and his absolute unperforming certainty about what mattered. And she thought about something she had never said to anyone. She had been thinking it for months, turning it over, but she had never said it because saying it made it real, and real things could be damaged. I love you, she said. She watched his face. He didn't move. I know, she said quickly. That's a strange time to say it. In the middle of a conversation about logistics and board conflicts, I know that's… Victoria, he said. What? Stop explaining it. She stopped. I love you too, he said. I've known it for a while. I was waiting for the right time to say it, and I think the right time might have been several months ago, but neither of us are very good at the uncomplicated version of things. She exhaled something that was almost a laugh, and not quite. That is extremely accurate. Yeah. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers briefly, the way he did things, without ceremony, without announcement, just the thing itself. We'll figure out the rest. The rest, as it turned out, took the remainder of July and most of August to begin to assemble. And assembling it was not clean, was not simple, was not the kind of thing that happened in a single conversation and resolved into certainty. It happened in pieces, over evenings and weekends and phone calls that ran long. Ethan was not the architect of it. That was important to understand. He was not the person who had the plan. What he did, what he had decided to do the night he sat on the couch after she left with the letter, was make a different kind of phone call. He called Marcus Chen on a Tuesday, introduced himself plainly, said he was calling because he was close to Victoria, and he had some concerns about what the next transition needed to look like. Marcus was quiet on the phone in the way of someone choosing their response carefully, and then he said, "She's told me about you. She said you were direct." "She says that about everyone she respects," Ethan said. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh. "What are your concerns?" "My concern is that she's built herself into the infrastructure of that company in a way that makes it very easy for everyone to let her stay inside it forever. And I think you probably know that." A pause. "I've thought about it." "She has somewhere she needs to go," Ethan said, "and she can't get there without the company being able to function without her constant presence. I'm not asking you to push her out. I'm asking you to be honest about whether the structural dependence on her is real or whether it's something that's been allowed to develop because it was convenient." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a pointed question." "I'm a pointed person." Another pause. "Structurally," Marcus said slowly, "the company doesn't need her the way the culture has normalized needing her. She's propped up some things that should have had independent legs years ago. I haven't pushed back on it because the results have been good, and it seemed like a discussion to have later." He exhaled. "Later, apparently, is now." "Apparently," Ethan said. She's going to have opinions about this conversation. I know, she can have opinions. They won't change the fact that it needed to happen. What Marcus did with that conversation, what decisions he made, what conversations he had with the board, what structural proposals he began drafting quietly over the following weeks. Ethan did not fully know and did not try to manage. He had lit the fuse and stepped back, which was all he had the right to do. He had learned long ago that fixing something required knowing which part was yours to fix and which part belonged to someone else. Clara he called on a Thursday evening, and that conversation was shorter and more direct. She needs you to actually be the person in the room when things go wrong with your mother, he said. Not the backup, not the person who calls Victoria when it gets complicated. The person. Clara was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Not defensively, just, I know. Can you do that? I've been waiting for someone to tell me I had to. A pause. Which sounds terrible, but it's the truth. As long as V was available to be the primary, I was always going to default to her. It's a muscle I haven't had to build. Start building it. Yeah, Clara exhaled. You're a little terrifying, you know that? Darnell says I'm a project he's invested in. Clara laughed. The same real laugh that Victoria had, the family echo of it. He told me the same thing about you months ago. I think he's been running a long play. He has, Ethan said. I've accepted it. Eleanor was the conversation he was most uncertain about. Not because she would be resistant. He had understood from their first meeting that Eleanor had made her peace with the necessity of this, but because she was a woman who carried her own complicated architecture of guilt and love and pride, and delivering the actual shape of it in real time was different from discussing it abstractly over tea in May. He drove to her house on a Saturday morning without telling Victoria. Eleanor answered the door in a linen blouse and the particular expression of someone who had been expecting this visit without knowing precisely when it would arrive. I heard you, she said, before you knocked. The truck. I'll get the muffler looked at, he said. She stepped back to let him in. You don't have a muffler problem. I heard you because I've been listening for you. She led him to the sitting room, which was full of afternoon light and the collected objects of a life. Framed photos, books with broken spines, a throw blanket on the armchair that had been used and washed many times. Sit. He sat. She sat across from him. She's going to go, he said. Eleanor looked at her hands. I know. The care structure needs to change, not for forever, but for the duration. That means the arrangement you and Clara have, where Victoria is the implicit safety net, that ends. It has to end for this to work. I know that too. She looked up. I've been arranging for the secondary nurse for 6 weeks. I didn't tell Victoria because she would have read it as a signal, and she wasn't ready for signals. He looked at her. You've been preparing. I've been a burden to my daughter's future for long enough, Eleanor said, and her voice was very even in the way of someone who has had a private reckoning and come out the other side of it changed. I'm 61 years old. I'm not incapacitated. I've allowed Victoria to make me more central to her decisions than I should be because it was easier than insisting she live her own life. She paused. That is not something I'm proud of. She wanted to, Ethan said. That's real. She wasn't coerced. She wanted to because she didn't know the alternative was still possible. Eleanor looked at him steadily. And now she does, because of you. Which means I owe you something I don't quite have the language for. You don't owe me anything. Don't argue with me about this. I'm older and I've been practicing. He almost smiled. What did you have in mind? She paused. Just take care of her while she figures out how to take care of herself. You seem to know the difference between those two things. Most people don't. On the drive back to Millhaven, Ethan drove with the windows down despite the August heat, through the flat country between the city and the town, past the fields that were going amber at the edges and the roadside stands selling late summer corn. He drove without music, just the wind and the road noise, just the particular feeling of someone who has done a hard thing well enough and is now in the space between that and the next hard thing. He thought about his father. He thought about the garage, about the sign with the crooked letter, about the smell of the place in the morning before anything had started. He thought about Lily, who was going to have to understand something complicated about why the person she had adopted into her vocabulary of important people would be 4 hours away for a significant period of time. That conversation was still ahead of him, and it was the one he was least certain about. Lily was 8 now. She understood more than he sometimes gave her credit for, and she felt more than she always had words for, and combining those two things produced a child who could surprise you badly if you didn't prepare. Victoria told her herself on a Sunday in late August, in the backyard, the two of them sitting on the old porch steps with glasses of lemonade, while Ethan did dishes that didn't need to be done because some conversations needed to happen without a parent in them. He couldn't hear the words. He watched from the kitchen window, watching Victoria lean forward with her forearms on her knees and speak to Lily directly, not performing gentleness, not using the particular careful cadence of an adult bracing a child for something. Just talking. And Lily listened, and he could tell from the set of her shoulders when the information landed, the small change in her posture. Then Lily said something. Then Victoria said something. Then Lily said something else, and Victoria laughed. Genuinely, the real one, and put her arm around Lily's shoulders, and Lily leaned in, not looking up, just leaning. He put the last dish away. He walked out to the back steps. Two faces turned to look at him. Victoria's going to school, Lily said. I know, he said. She's going to be a doctor. I know that too. Lily thought about this with her characteristic gravity. Will she come back? Yes, he said. He said it without hesitation, which was the right call, because Lily could detect hesitation the way she detected the smell of something burning, immediately, and with alarm. Lily looked at Victoria. You're going to come back. I'm going to come back, Victoria said. Lily considered this for another moment and then nodded, once, conclusive, the way she made decisions. Okay, she said, and picked up her lemonade. Can we go see the garage before dinner? I want to show Victoria the new sign. Darnell had replaced the crooked letter. The new sign was straight and clean and read, Callaway and Son Auto in black letters against a white background, exactly as it always had. And Lily pointed at it from the truck window as they pulled in and said, with the tone of a proprietor showing a guest something important, That's better. Victoria looked at the sign, then at Ethan. Son, she said. It was my dad's sign first, he said. I never changed it. Now Darnell went and fixed it, so. You're keeping it. Of course I'm keeping it. She looked at the sign again. Something in her expression was quieter than her face usually was, the way a person looks when something clicks into place that they'd been holding slightly wrong. They went inside. Darnell was there, which was not a surprise, because Darnell was always there on the days that mattered, which was either a coincidence or the result of a man who paid very close attention to the calendar. He shook Victoria's hand with the direct warmth of someone who had decided a long time ago how he felt about a person, and saw no reason to conceal it. I hear you're going to medical school, he said. I am, she said. Good. He nodded once, the same way Lily did. It's about time somebody in this orbit made some good decisions. Hey, Ethan said. I'm not including you in that. You make good decisions. I'm speaking generally. Darnell turned back to the car he'd been working on. There's coffee in the office. They had coffee in the office. Lily sat on the rolling stool and spun slowly. The late August light came through the high windows and lay across the concrete floor in the particular amber of an ending afternoon, and the garage made its familiar sounds. The pop of metal cooling, the hum of the air compressor, the faint echo of the radio from the front bay where someone had left it playing. Victoria sat with the coffee cup in both hands and looked around the space slowly. The shelves with their labeled parts bins, the whiteboard with the weekly schedule, the photograph of Robert Callaway that Ethan had put up after Darnell had found it in a box and said, without any particular drama, that it should be somewhere visible. He looks like you, she said, about the photograph. Everyone says that. It's true. She looked at the photograph for a moment. I think he would have been okay with all of this. He would have had opinions, Ethan said. Positive ones. Some positive ones. He leaned against the desk. He would have told you to stop apologizing for wanting things. He was very hard on apologizing for wanting things. She looked at him. Did he say that to you? Regularly. He crossed his arms. He said the worst thing you can do to a person who loves you is make them watch you fold yourself up to fit a space that was never the right size. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the coffee cup. She looked at Ethan. "Your father," she said, "was a very wise man." "He was right about most things," Ethan said. "He was wrong about ciabatta. But you can't have everything." She laughed. And it was the full version, unguarded, unshaping, the one that happened before she could make a decision about it. Lily looked up from the rolling stool, saw the two adults laughing in the office doorway, decided this was acceptable, and returned to spinning. The acceptance letter went back to the program on a Tuesday, 3 days before the deadline, sent from Victoria's computer at her city townhouse at 9:47 in the evening. She told Ethan by text, "Done. Sent." He was sitting on the couch reading when it came in. He read it twice. He put the phone face down on the couch cushion and sat in the quiet of the house for a minute. Just sat. Just let it be real. Just allowed himself the weight of knowing that something had been set in motion that would cost him and also give him things whose shape he couldn't yet see. He picked up the phone. He typed, "I'm proud of you." She wrote back, "I'm terrified." "I know. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll get better at it. That's what school is for." A pause. Then, "You make everything sound manageable. It's all manageable. It's just not all easy." Another pause. Longer this time. He could picture her at her desk in the townhouse, the city visible through the window behind her, the acceptance letter sent and irretrievable, the future of it sitting in her chest like a stone and a light at the same time. Her last message that night came in at 10:12. "Thank you for not making it easy to choose wrong." He read it. He turned off the lamp. He lay in the dark of his bedroom in his house in Mill Haven and looked at the ceiling and thought about the months ahead, the logistics, the distances, the particular difficulty of loving someone across a geography and a timeline that didn't accommodate convenience. He thought about Lily and what she was going to need. He thought about the garage and Darnell and the supplier meeting in October and all the machinery of a small life continuing exactly as it should. And somewhere in the middle of all of that thinking, without warning and without particular ceremony, he fell asleep. Outside, August was ending. The summer was going the way summers go, not all at once, but 1 degree at a time, the evenings arriving earlier, the light holding a different angle on the garage roof. The old maple at the corner of the property had already started, one branch going early the way one branch always did, putting out its color before anything else was ready. Robert Calloway had loved that tree. He used to say it was showing off. Ethan thought before sleep took him. Yeah, maybe that's not the worst thing. September arrived the way it always does in Mill Haven, with a shift in the light more than the temperature, the angle of the sun dropping just enough that the shadows came earlier and lay longer across the garage lot. The maple at the corner of the property had committed fully now, the whole tree gone orange-red, no longer just the one showing off branch. Ethan noticed it on a Monday morning when he unlocked the shop and stood in the doorway with his coffee, the way his father used to stand, looking at the tree, looking at the street, taking the measure of the day before asking anything of it. Victoria's enrollment date was January. That gave them 4 months. 4 months that had to contain everything that needed to happen before she could leave without leaving things broken. The word leave was something Ethan had been careful with, in his own head and in conversations. He didn't use it around Lily. He used go to school, which was accurate and which Lily had filed under the category of things that happen in the world and are not emergencies. Kids understood school. School had a duration. School ended. He watched Lily process it over the following days after Victoria's backyard conversation, the information settling in layers the way information did with her. Surface acceptance first, then the occasional sideways question that revealed deeper processing, then a long period of apparently not thinking about it at all while she was actually thinking about it constantly. The sideways question came on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into September, while Ethan was helping her with a math worksheet that had exceeded her patience and was now suffering for it. "When Victoria's gone," Lily said, not looking up from the paper, "do we still talk to her?" "Of course," he said. "On the phone or on the screen?" "Both. Whichever she has time for." Lily considered this. Mrs. Parrish says when people go far away, they sometimes forget about the people who aren't there. Mrs. Parrish is talking about a different kind of far away. What kind? He put down his pencil and looked at her. The kind where someone doesn't want to come back. Victoria wants to come back. That's a different situation entirely. Lily looked up from the worksheet. She had her mother's eyes and her father's way of assessing information, turning it over, checking it from multiple angles before deciding whether to accept it. How do you know? Because she told me, he said. And because when someone tells me something and I believe them, I go with that until I have a reason not to. Has she given you a reason not to? 8 years old, he thought. 8 years old and already asking the actual question beneath the question. No, he said. Okay, Lily said, and returned to the math worksheet. Subject closed, decision made. He watched her bend over the paper and thought about what it must be like to be in her head. The constant intake and processing and filing, the architecture she was building of how the world worked, and who was reliable in it, and what things were worth worrying about. He hoped he was getting enough of it right. He hoped she would forgive him for the parts he got wrong. That was all a parent could really do. Hope and pay attention and show up. The first real complication arrived in October. It didn't come from the direction he expected. He had been bracing for the company issues, the board situation, the transition structure, and Marcus Chen had those largely in hand, a fact that Ethan knew from a brief monthly call he'd established with Marcus that Victoria knew about and had chosen not to examine too closely. What arrived instead was personal, and it arrived in the form of a phone call from a man named Thomas Hale. Ethan found out about Thomas Hale the way he found out about most things involving Victoria's history, indirectly, through information that surfaced naturally rather than through any particular conversation they'd had on the subject. Claire had mentioned the name once, the night of the dinner party. Thomas was a mistake dressed in a good suit. Eleanor had not mentioned him by name, but had referenced, obliquely, a difficult period 3 years ago when Victoria was not well served by someone she trusted. The outline was clear enough that Ethan had never needed the specific details. Thomas Hale called Victoria's cell on a Thursday evening while she was sitting at Ethan's kitchen table reviewing enrollment documents from the medical program, a glass of wine at her elbow and reading glasses she'd recently started needing perched on the end of her nose. Ethan was in the living room with Lily, working through a chapter book they'd been reading together for 3 weeks. He heard Victoria's voice shift, not dramatically, but enough. A change in register, the particular compression of a person who has just encountered something they were not expecting. She came to the doorway 10 minutes later. I need to take this in the other room, she said, and she said it to the general space rather than to him specifically, which told him something. He nodded. She went. He read another page to Lily, who was leaning against him with the concentrated absorption of a child, very invested in whether the fictional dog in the story was going to find its way home. She came back 23 minutes later. He knew because he'd been tracking it without meaning to, in the background of the reading, the way a person tracks a sound they've identified as potentially significant. She sat back down at the kitchen table. She put her reading glasses back on. She looked at the enrollment document, and then she said, without looking up, "My ex-boyfriend called." "Thomas," Ethan said. She looked up. "Clara told you." "Clara mentioned the name once. Your mother implied the general situation." He turned the page of the chapter book, which Lily had fallen asleep against him and therefore no longer required. "What did he want?" Victoria set the reading glasses down. "He's in the city. He said he heard I was making changes. He has contacts who know people on the board, apparently, which is exactly the kind of thing Thomas would maintain. He said he wanted to have dinner, to catch up." She paused. "He also said he heard I was seeing someone, which he said in a tone of voice that communicated several things he didn't say directly." "What kind of things?" She looked at him steadily. "The kind where someone who left because the relationship stopped serving them decides to reappear when they notice someone else has found it valuable." She picked up her wine glass. "He was not a good person to me. He was not overtly cruel. He wasn't that kind of bad. He was the kind of bad that's harder to name. He made me feel like I was always slightly failing at being the version of myself he'd decided I should be." She set the glass down. "I said no to dinner. Okay, he said. I said it clearly. He pushed back in the way that he pushes back, which is very polished and very persistent, and I said it again, and then I ended the call. She straightened the enrollment document in front of her. I'm telling you because I don't want you to hear it from somewhere else, and I don't want there to be a version of this where you're wondering. I wasn't wondering, he said. I know, but I wanted you to know anyway. He looked at her. Did it shake you, hearing from him? She thought about it honestly. For about 3 minutes, she said. The first 3 minutes of the call, before I understood why he was calling, I felt something. Not nostalgia exactly, more like the muscle memory of a habit. And then it went away. She paused. It went away faster than I expected. What made it go away? She glanced at him with an expression that was almost self-conscious, which on Victoria was very rare. I kept thinking about this kitchen, she said, this table, the fact that I was sitting here doing actual paperwork for actual medical school, which is something Thomas would have found. She stopped. He had opinions about the medicine thing. He thought it was impractical. He said it was a good idea for someone else's life. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That man, he said carefully, has nothing to do with your life or your decisions or the next several years of it. I know. I just want to make sure we agree on that. We agree. She put the reading glasses back on and turned to the enrollment document with the particular finality of someone closing a door behind them. I have a question about the health insurance continuity during the enrollment period. Can I think out loud at you? That's what I'm here for, he said. It was such a domestic, small, ordinary moment. A woman at a kitchen table with paperwork and wine, a man on the couch with a sleeping kid against his shoulder, the October evening pressing against the windows. And it was also, he thought, exactly the right answer to the question of why Thomas Hale's call had lasted 3 minutes and lost. The harder conversation happened 3 weeks later, and it came from a direction he had prepared for less. Marcus Chen called on a Monday, and the call was not the brief professional check-in their conversations usually were. It was longer and more specific, and by the end of it, Ethan was standing in the garage office with the door closed, running a hand through his hair, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has received information they need time to process before deciding what to do with it. The Kellerton acquisition, Marcus said, has developed a complication that I need to be transparent with you about. The 2 directors, the conflict I mentioned. It didn't resolve cleanly when Victoria stepped back from mediating it. One of them, Hargrove, has been making noise to certain shareholders about instability in leadership. He's using Victoria's transition as evidence of a structural weakness in the company's executive succession. He's not wrong that there's a gap, but he's using it in a way that's... Marcus paused. It's designed to create pressure for Victoria to return in a full capacity before she's gone. Ethan processed this. He knows about the program. He knows she has a personal reason for reducing her presence. He doesn't have the specific details, but he's smart enough to use the gap, and he's been at it for 2 weeks. What does Victoria know? She knows about the acquisition complication. She doesn't know about Hargrove's specific angle because I've been managing it and I didn't want to hand her a reason to reverse course before she was fully committed. A pause. I'm telling you because I need to decide how to handle it, and I don't want to do that without you knowing. Why me? Because you're the person who convinced her to go, Marcus said simply, which means you have a stake in whether the reasons for going hold. Ethan sat on the corner of the desk. The garage outside was its regular sound. Air compressor, radio, Darnell's voice over something in the front bay. The smell of it. The ordinary machinery of a place that worked because it was maintained. What are Hargrove's actual leverage points, he said. Marcus walked him through it. Ethan listened without interrupting, which was something he was disciplined about. Actually listening, not queuing up his response, just taking in the full shape of the problem before forming an opinion. When Marcus finished, Ethan asked 3 specific questions. Marcus answered them, and then there was a pause. You understand corporate board dynamics, Marcus said. It wasn't quite a question. I understand systems, Ethan said. A board is a system. Systems have pressure points and load-bearing pieces and things that look structural but aren't. It's not so different. Who taught you that? My father. He was talking about engines, but it generalizes. Ethan stood up. Hargrove needs to be confronted directly, not managed around, not given an alternative route to feel important. He needs someone to look him in the eye and tell him his play is visible and it's not going to work. That someone would ideally have standing, Marcus said. I'm the COO. I have standing, but I'm also the person he's trying to go around. There are 2 other board members who have been watching Hargrove and who I believe would shut this down if someone gave them the language for it. Give them the language. I intend to. But I wanted you to know that this is happening because there's a version of the next 2 weeks where this surfaces to Victoria in a form that's designed to make her feel responsible for it. Let me worry about that version, Ethan said. He did not tell Victoria, not immediately. He told Darnell instead that same afternoon because he needed to say it out loud to someone in order to understand what he was actually feeling about it, and Darnell was the person who fulfilled that function in his life. A board member is trying to use her leaving as a crowbar to bring her back, he said. Darnell was under a jeep. A hand emerged and made a gesture. And Marcus is handling it. But if it gets to her before Marcus handles it, she'll feel responsible and she'll start recalculating. Then make sure she hears it from you first, if it comes to that. Don't let it arrive from a direction you're not controlling. I'm not trying to control what she hears. The hand emerged again, this time with a wrench. I know you're not. I mean, be the person who tells her, if it needs telling. Don't manage her. Just be there first so she's not alone with it. Ethan leaned against the lift column. When did you get so good at this? I've been married for 11 years, Darnell said. You learn or you don't. I chose to learn. Ethan had met Darnell's wife exactly 4 times, but each time she had struck him as a woman who operated on a frequency that most people couldn't quite tune into. Precise, quiet, watching everything with eyes that didn't miss. He understood suddenly that Darnell's particular genius for human dynamics had not arrived from nowhere. Tell Sandra I said thank you, he said. She knows, Darnell said, and went back under the jeep. Marcus resolved the Hargrove situation in 11 days. He did it the way Ethan had suggested, directly, with 2 allied board members present, in a conversation that Hargrove apparently attempted to redirect twice before understanding that the redirect wasn't going to work. The details came to Ethan in a brief text from Marcus. Handled. Hargrove backed down. The Kellerton path is clear. Ethan showed Victoria the text that evening, with context, having decided that she was owed the full picture even though the crisis had passed. She read it. She read it again. She set the phone down on the table between them. You called Marcus, she said, back in September, and again last week when this came up. She looked at him with the expression that had become familiar to him, the slight recalibration of a person encountering something they hadn't expected. You've been... She stopped. Not managing you, he said. Marcus was going to be navigating this whether I was involved or not. I just made sure the communication was clear and that someone was paying attention to the moving parts. Without telling me. Without worrying you with things that weren't your problem to fix. He held her gaze. You had enrollment documents and program prep and your mother's care restructure and about 14 other things on your plate. Hargrove was Marcus's problem, not yours. I just helped Marcus see it that way. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her deciding how to feel about it, working through the part where she might reasonably be annoyed about being kept from information, and the part where the information had been kept in a way that served her rather than controlled her, and the part where she was sitting here because a series of people had chosen to handle things so that she could sit here. I don't know whether to be grateful or irritated, she said. Both seem fair, he said. You're infuriating, she said. She picked up the phone, set it back down. You built a whole support structure around my departure without making it visible enough to feel like charity. It's not charity. It's people who care about you doing things they should have been doing anyway. You coordinated it. I helped. He shrugged. I'm good at logistics. Ask Darnell. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I need you to understand something. Okay. I have spent my entire professional life being the person who coordinates things, who sees the whole picture and moves the pieces. I am very, very good at it. She paused. Nobody has ever done it for me before. In any area. Not once. Another pause. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Just let it be what it is. She looked at the table, looked at her hands. I'm going to miss you, she said quietly, like the fact of it had just arrived in full. Not the abstract future version of it, but the actual weight of it, the specific gravity of 4 hours and a daily life that wouldn't overlap the way it did now. I know I'm supposed to be past the part where I'm scared of that. I'm past most of it, but this part, Victoria. What? I'm going to miss you too. He said it without drama, just the fact. Every day. And it's going to be hard some of those days and less hard others, and there are going to be weeks where the distance feels like a physical thing. I know that. You know that. And we're going to do it anyway. She was quiet. Because the alternative, he said, is you staying and us both knowing you stayed and carrying that. I don't want to carry that. I don't think you do either. No, she said. I don't. Then we go in clear. She nodded slowly. Something in her face settled. Not resolved, not comfortable, but settled. The way a thing settles when you've accepted it fully enough to stop fighting it. November was its own kind of difficult, in the particular way of a month that knows time is running out and doesn't try to hide it. The trees had gone bare. The days shortened dramatically. The garage got cold in the mornings again, and Ethan arrived early to let it warm up the way he always did in the cold months, standing in the doorway with his coffee. But now he sometimes stood there longer than he needed to, just being in the familiar smell of the place, the specific quality of a November morning in a building that had been his father's and was now his. Victoria came to Millhaven every other weekend through November, and on the weekend she didn't come, he drove to the city on Saturday morning and came back Sunday night. The hours in the car weren't wasted. They were thinking hours, the kind of concentrated solitude that a man with a child and a business and a full life rarely got, and he used them. He thought about the garage's winter schedule and about Lily's school situation and about what needed to happen structurally at the shop to make the coming months manageable with his attention divided. He had conversations with Darnell about taking on a more senior role in day-to-day operations, not ownership. Darnell had been clear that ownership wasn't what he was looking for, but responsibility, decision-making authority for the things that didn't require Ethan specifically. Darnell agreed to this with the minimal ceremony of a man who had been waiting for the question for about 2 years. He had the Lily conversation in November. Not the general one. They'd covered the general territory in August and September. This was the specific one, the one about what the next several months were actually going to look like, because Lily was now old enough to deserve specifics rather than generalities. He sat with her on a Sunday afternoon, the two of them on the couch with the chapter book closed beside them, the November gray pressing against the windows, and he told her. Victoria would leave in January. She would be in Harrington for the school year, and the year after, and the year after that. She would come back when she could. School had breaks, schedule permitting, and they would visit when they were able. It would be different. It would be hard sometimes. It would also be okay. Lily listened to all of this with her eyes on the middle distance, turning it over. She's not leaving because of us, Lily said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. She's going because of her. That's different. That's very different. Lily picked up the chapter book and opened it to the page they'd left off. She seemed to be done with the conversation, which he'd learned meant she'd filed what she needed and the rest would surface later in sideways questions. He opened to the page. Read the first paragraph. Dad, she said. Yeah. Are you going to be sad? He considered lying, considered softening it, and decided against both. Sometimes, he said. Not every day, but sometimes. She thought about this. That's okay, she said, with the deliberate seriousness of a child extending a permission she's thought through carefully. You're allowed to be sad about things that are also good. He looked at her, his daughter, with her cloud diagrams and her missing teeth and her mother's eyes and the particular gravity she'd been born with that had nothing to do with either of her parents and was simply, inexplicably, hers. When did you get so wise? He said. Darnell told me that once, she said, about something else. I remembered it. He laughed, short, real, startled out of him. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. He read the next paragraph. Christmas that year was the last one before the geography changed, and nobody said that out loud, but everyone felt it. That particular quality that endings give to things before they're actually over. The extra attention you pay to the texture of something you know is changing. They spent Christmas Eve at Eleanor's house, Ethan and Lily and Victoria and Clara's boyfriend of 3 months, who was clearly terrified of the Ashford women and handling it by being aggressively helpful with everything. Eleanor had decorated with the specific commitment of someone for whom tradition is not optional, and the house was lit and warm and smelled like the dinner they'd been cooking most of the afternoon. Lily wore a red dress that she'd selected herself and defended vigorously against all suggested alternatives. She had brought her current cloud diagram, updated to include mesocyclones, which she'd recently discovered, rolled in a cardboard tube, which she presented to Eleanor at the door as if it were a diplomatic document. Eleanor accepted it with full seriousness, unrolled it at the kitchen table, and asked 4 specific questions about the rotation dynamics of a mesocyclone, which Lily answered at length, while Clara's boyfriend stood in the corner looking like a man who had underestimated the evening considerably. Dinner was loud and imperfect. The gravy was too thin, and Clara said so immediately, and then tried to fix it in a way that made it slightly worse. Eleanor dropped an ornament before dinner, a blue glass one that had been her mother's, and there was a painful moment of silence before she said quietly, "Well," and bent to collect the pieces. Victoria was beside her in 2 steps, and Clara too, and the 3 of them crouched on the floor picking up blue glass while the rest of the room held its breath. Eleanor said, after a moment, "I have a photograph of it. I'll remember it that way." And then she stood up and said, "Now, someone fix the gravy." And the room exhaled. After dinner, while Clara held court in the sitting room, and Eleanor and Lily were apparently having an in-depth conversation about whether cumulus or cumulonimbus were more interesting, Ethan and Victoria stood in the kitchen with the aftermath of the meal around them. Dishes, wine glasses, the thin gravy in its pot. And Victoria washed and he dried, a division they'd arrived at naturally some months ago and maintained without discussion. "Next Christmas," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It'll be different." "It will." "Not bad different," she said. It was something between a statement and a question. "No," he said. "Just different." She handed him a wine glass. He dried it. Outside the kitchen window, Eleanor's yard was dark and bare and still, the kind of December stillness that's more absence than peace. Inside, Clara's voice from the sitting room, Lily's precise explanations, the clatter of the holiday. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "Ask me." He turned to look at her. She was still looking at the sink, at her hands in the soapy water. "Ask me," she said again. Quieter. He had been thinking about it for 3 months. He had turned it over the way he turned over every significant thing, from multiple angles, slowly, without forcing the conclusion, waiting until the right pressure in the right place. He had decided, somewhere in November, that the timing wasn't right, that asking before she left would carry a weight that might complicate rather than strengthen, that it might look like an anchor rather than a promise. He had decided to wait. He looked at her now, at the sight of her face in the kitchen light, the tension in her shoulders that was not anxiety, but anticipation. The particular stillness of someone who has decided something and is waiting for the other person to catch up. He put the wine glass down. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not decorated with anything, not a performance, just the question. She turned to look at him. Her hands were still in the water. "Yes," she said. Equally plain, equally direct. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back at him. From the sitting room, Clara's voice, Lily saying something about updrafts. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I know. I wasn't planning this for tonight. I know." Something in her expression was very quiet and very certain. "I knew you were thinking about it. I didn't know when. I decided to ask you to ask me because I didn't want to wait anymore." "You asked me to ask you." "I did." "That's very you," he said. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It's just very you." She pulled her hands from the water. He handed her a dish towel. She dried her hands. He looked at this woman in this kitchen on this Christmas Eve and thought, this is the person. Not with romantic drama. Not with the grand sweeping certainty of movies. Just the plain, bedrock, unglamorous truth of it, the way you recognize something that has been true for a while and you're simply now saying it to yourself directly. Clara is going to make this a thing, he said. Clara is going to be intolerable, Victoria agreed, for at least 6 months. Your mother is going to say she knew. My mother did know. She's been knowing for about a year. Victoria folded the dish towel. Lily? He thought about it. She'll ask practical questions first, then she'll be happy, then she'll have opinions about the process. Strong opinions? Extremely strong opinions. Victoria looked at him, and for a moment the composed, measured, competent exterior of her was entirely absent. Not stripped away, but simply not needed. And underneath it was just the person, just Victoria, just this woman who had driven a casserole to a small town in January and was standing in her mother's kitchen in December with soapy water on her wrists, saying yes to a mechanic from Mill Haven in the most unscripted and unrehearsed moment of her adult life. Okay, she said, then let's go tell them. Now? Now. He looked at her. You want to tell your family at Christmas dinner? I want to tell the people I love the thing that's true, she said. The timing is incidental. He looked at the kitchen doorway. Thought about Clara's reaction, thought about Eleanor's face, thought about Lily, currently explaining mesocyclones to a 61-year-old woman who had decided to become a genuine expert on cloud formations because a child she loved cared about them. Okay, he said. They walked out of the kitchen together. Clara was mid-sentence about something regarding a mutual acquaintance, and she stopped when she saw them, both of them, the particular quality of two people who have just settled something and are carrying it visibly into a room. Clara, to her credit, read it in approximately 2 seconds. Oh, she said. Eleanor looked up from the cloud diagram. Lily looked at her father's face, and then at Victoria's face, and then with the 8-year-old directness that had never once failed to go straight to the point. Did you say yes? She said yes, Ethan said. Lily nodded once, conclusive, as if confirming information she had already compiled. Good, she said. I thought she would. And then she turned back to the diagram and said to Eleanor, Can I show you the updraft section now? Clara made a sound that was immediately tears, which she covered immediately by standing up and hugging Victoria for a long time, and then Ethan for a long time, saying nothing that was coherent but communicating completely. Eleanor stood more slowly, the way she did everything now, with careful economy, and when she reached Ethan, she put both hands on his face for a moment, the gesture of a woman who has run out of words and is using a different language. And then she pulled him into a brief, firm embrace and stepped back. Your father, she said quietly. I know, he said. He would have been. I know, he said again. And he did know. Not in a way he could explain, just in the way you know things about people you loved and lost, in the accumulated weight of years of watching someone be who they were. January arrived faster than any of them expected or were ready for. The morning of Victoria's departure was a Thursday, and it was cold. The specific still cold of a January that isn't performing winter, but simply is it, no wind, just the gray, and the temperature and the bare trees. Ethan drove to the city the night before and spent it at her townhouse, which was half-packed into the organized, systematized boxes of a woman who could not do anything without structure, labeled and stacked against the living room wall. She wasn't taking everything. The townhouse would hold her city life in suspension, a base of operations for board visits and brief returns, but she was taking enough that the space looked sparse and provisional. They didn't make a ceremony of the last night. They talked about logistics, the program's schedule, the drive, the storage unit she'd arranged in Harrington for the larger items. They talked about Lily's February school project, which Ethan had mentioned in passing, and which Victoria had immediately identified as requiring specific materials she'd ordered online 3 weeks ago, and which had arrived at the Mill Haven house labeled with a note that said, "For the project. Don't let her use them all at once." They talked about the ring, which was being made by a jeweler in the city who had required more time than anticipated and which was not ready yet, a fact that Ethan had been more bothered by than Victoria, who said she didn't need it immediately and meant it. They went to sleep at a reasonable hour, like two adults who had accepted something and were choosing not to make it harder by treating it as more tragic than it was. In the morning, he loaded the last boxes into the rental car while she did one final walkthrough of the townhouse. He stood in the parking structure with his breath visible in the cold air, and he thought about the day she had walked out of that same elevator for their first date, in October the year before, looking tired and slightly uncertain in a way she'd been trying not to show. 14 months. It had the weight of something longer. He thought that was the sign of time used well. Not that it passed quickly or slowly, but that it accumulated, that it built something with its passing. She came out of the elevator with her coat and her bag and her car keys, and she stopped in front of him and looked at him with the composed clarity of someone who has made peace with a hard thing. "I hate this part," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not going to perform being fine with this part." "You don't have to," he said. "I'm going to be okay once I'm moving. It's the—" She stopped. "It's the standing here." "Then don't stand here," he said. "Go." She looked at him. He looked at her. She kissed him. Not briefly, not with the distracted quality of a scheduled moment. The real thing, deliberate and present and without hurry, in a parking structure in January with their breath clouding the cold air around them. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright. She was not going to cry. He knew that about her. She didn't cry in front of people easily, and when she did, it surprised her. What she did instead was take a breath and straighten slightly and put the keys in her hand. "Tell Lily I'll call tonight," she said. "She'll be by the phone at 7, he said. "She's already decided." Something that was almost a smile. "Of course she has." She got in the car. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. The engine started. She pulled forward toward the exit ramp, and then she stopped. Brake lights, a pause, and the window came down. "Ethan," he walked forward. "I need you to know something," she said, "before I go. I need you to know that nobody has ever—" She stopped. Tried again. "The way you did this, the way you built the space for me to actually go, I don't have language for that. I've tried to find it for months. There isn't language." He looked at her. "You'll find a way to pay it back," he said. "You always do." "I don't want to pay it back," she said. "I want to—" She pressed her lips together. "I just wanted you to know that I know what it cost you." "It cost me some sleep," he said. "That's manageable." She looked at him for a moment longer. Her eyes were very bright. "I'm coming back," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm coming back to you." "I know that too." The window went up, the car moved forward, up the ramp, and turned and was gone. He stood in the parking structure in the cold for a minute. Then he walked back to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat. He put his hands on the steering wheel and held it and looked at the concrete wall in front of him. He was not going to pretend this was easy. He was not going to perform being fine. He had told Lily she was allowed to be sad about things that were also good, and he believed that, and he was going to practice it. After a minute, he started the truck. He pulled out of the structure. He drove through the January city, past the buildings and the bare trees and the early commuters, and he got on the road that went north toward Millhaven, 4 hours. The familiar drive, the flat country opening up around him as he left the city behind. He thought about his father, who had bought the garage before he had money to run it, who had married Ethan's mother before anyone said the timing was right, who had shown up completely and consistently and without hedging and called that love. He thought about the sign on the garage, Callaway and Sun Auto, straight now. The letter fixed. He turned on the radio. Something easy came through, nothing significant, just background. He rolled the window down 2 inches despite the cold, just enough to feel the air moving. The highway spread out ahead of him, gray and long and ordinary. He drove toward home. The first month was the hardest, and the hardest part of the first month was the specific quality of the silence that replaced her. Not that the house had ever been loud with Victoria in it. She wasn't a loud person. She didn't fill rooms with noise. What she filled them with was something else, a quality of attention, a particular weight of presence that Ethan had apparently been tracking without knowing it, because now that it was gone, he could feel the exact shape of its absence the way you feel the shape of a missing tooth with your tongue. Not dramatic, just there, just constant. He got through January the way he got through most hard things, by working. The garage in January was never slow, and this January was no exception. 2 transmission jobs, a fleet of county vehicles that came in for winter inspection, a diesel engine that required 3 days of focused attention before it surrendered its problem to him. He arrived early and left when he needed to leave, and Darnell said very little about any of it except the things that needed saying about the work, which was the right call and which Ethan appreciated without mentioning. Victoria called every night she could. Not every night. There were clinical rotations that ran long, study sessions that collapsed the available hours, the particular exhaustion of someone doing something genuinely hard for the first time in a while. On the nights she didn't call, she texted, sometimes just 1 sentence, sometimes less. Pharmacology's trying to kill me. Or, I identified a murmur today before the attending did. I didn't say anything about it, but I knew. Or once simply thinking about the kitchen table. He saved that last one. He didn't examine why. He just moved it to a folder on his phone and left it there. Lily adapted in the way children adapt to things they've been prepared for. Not without difficulty, but with the particular resilience of someone who had been told the truth in advance and trusted the person who told it. She called Victoria on Thursday evenings, which had become their designated time, and these calls had a consistent structure. Lily would report on the cloud situation. She had moved from theoretical meteorology into something she was calling field research, which meant she recorded weather observations daily in a notebook. And Victoria would report on the medical school situation, and they would exchange this information like 2 colleagues briefing each other on parallel projects. She asked me today about patient confidentiality, Victoria told Ethan on a Saturday night call in February. How I know which information belongs to me and which belongs to the patient. What did you tell her? I told her the information belongs to the person it's about. Always. The professional just carries it temporarily. A pause. She thought about that for a while and then said, like a cloud carries rain until it's ready to let go. And I didn't have a response to that for a few seconds. She does that, he said. She does it more than you warn people. I've stopped warning people. I just watch their faces. She laughed, the real one. Across 4 hours of highway and winter and the infrastructure of a phone call, he could hear exactly what it sounded like. And the hearing of it was both good and costly in the specific way that things are costly when they're real. February gave way to March. And March was its own kind of difficult in a different way. Not the raw adjustment of January, but the longer grinding difficulty of distance sustained, of a routine that works structurally, but costs something each day in a way that doesn't announce itself. He was fine. He was genuinely fine most of the time. He was also not going to pretend that fine was the same as whole, because he was a man who had decided a long time ago that honesty was more useful than performance, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of failure. He told Darnell this one afternoon in March, which was the kind of thing he would not have said to most people, but said to Darnell, because Darnell was the person who received that kind of information without making it into anything more than it was. Some days it's harder than I planned for, he said. Darnell looked up from the engine he was assessing. Yeah, he said. I figured. I'm not asking for anything about it. I just wanted to say it out loud. Good, Darnell said. You should say things out loud when they're true. He went back to the engine. She called Sandra last week. Ethan looked at him. Victoria called your wife. Asked her about being married to someone whose work was physically present all the time when you can't be. Darnell reached for a socket wrench. Sandra told her the trick was to stop measuring the distance and start measuring the actual time together. That the math feels different when you count what you have instead of what you're missing. That's good advice. Sandra has good advice. I've been the beneficiary of it for 11 years. He found the right socket. Victoria apparently cried a little, which she apologized for, and Sandra told her not to apologize for her feelings in her kitchen, even over the phone. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Darnell. Yeah. Your wife and my fiancé are apparently building a relationship without us. I know. Darnell said, with the satisfaction of a man who finds this entirely correct. Sandra's excited about it. She said Victoria needed someone outside the family and outside the relationship who wasn't going to manage her. He tightened the socket. I think she's right. He was right about the math feeling different when you counted differently. Ethan figured that out gradually over March and April. The shift from tracking the days of absence to tracking the actual moments of contact, which were not nothing, were in fact substantial and real, and had a quality to them that, he started to understand, was partly a product of the distance. There was a specificity to the conversations that came from having limited time in them. There was an attention that came from not having access to the casual, ambient presence of someone you lived near. He started to understand why people who had been through long separations sometimes said the distance had taught them things the proximity hadn't. He didn't romanticize it. It was still hard, but it was also not without its uses. He visited Harrington in April, drove up on a Friday after closing the shop, checked into a motel that was fine in the way that motels are fine when you don't care about the motel, and picked her up from campus at 7 in the evening. She came out of the medical school building looking different, not dramatically, not a transformation scene different, just slightly different in the way a person looks when they've been using themselves fully, and it shows in their posture. She was tired, clearly, but it was a different quality of tired than the corporate exhaustion he'd known in her. That exhaustion had been the weariness of someone running a machine that was too big. This was the weariness of someone doing something that required everything they had and was worth what it required. Her eyes were the same, but they were busier, more information behind them. She got in the truck and looked at him and said, "You cut your hair." 2 weeks ago, he said. "It's shorter than I expected." Lily had opinions about it. Good opinions or bad opinions? She said I looked like someone's dad, which she appeared to think was a compliment, and which I chose to receive as one. Victoria laughed, and then she reached across the center console and put her hand against the side of his face for a moment. Not a gesture that required anything, just the gesture of someone touching a thing they have been missing and are glad to find still there. He let her. He put his hand briefly over hers. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. They went to a diner 2 blocks from campus that she'd apparently been to 4 times in 4 months, always alone, always with a textbook, and which the staff had apparently begun to treat her with the comfortable familiarity of a regular. The woman at the counter said, "You brought someone," with the tone that suggested this was news. Victoria said, "My fiancé," with a casualness that was not entirely casual, and the woman looked at Ethan and said, "She studies too hard," in a tone that communicated this was a message he was expected to deliver. "I know," he said. "I'm working on it." Over dinner, burgers, the kind of dinner nobody made a reservation for, the kind that was exactly right for a Friday night in a diner near a university. She told him about the program. Not the surface version, not the version she condensed for phone calls. The real version. The specifics. The attendings whose methods she was learning to read. The classmates who were 22 and occasionally made her feel ancient, and occasionally made her feel like being older was an advantage she hadn't expected. The anatomy section that had been harder than anything she'd done in years. Not because she couldn't handle the material, but because handling it required a different kind of memory than she was used to, and she'd had to learn how to learn again, which was humbling in a way she hadn't been humbled by anything in a long time. "Tell me about the hard part," he said. "Not the clinical hard. The personal hard." She turned her coffee cup. "The first 3 weeks I kept waiting to be bad at it," she said. "I'd built up this fear. I told you, the fear of being in a room of 22-year-olds and discovering I actually couldn't do it. And the first 3 weeks I kept waiting for that moment, and it never came, and that was almost harder. Because then I had to let go of the fear I'd been using as ballast." "What were you using it for?" "To stay humble, to stay realistic." She paused. "To have a reason to fail in advance. If I expected to fail, I couldn't be disappointed. And when it didn't happen, then I had to actually be there," she said, "fully, without the exit plan of a prepared failure." She looked at him. "That sounds strange." "It sounds familiar," he said. "People do that with a lot of things." She nodded slowly. "There was a patient last month. Clinic rotation, so real patients, actual people. Woman, 54, presenting with what the chart listed as routine follow-up, but I could see from the way she answered questions that she was managing information, giving the clinical facts and holding the personal ones back. And I had maybe 40 minutes with her, and I had to decide whether to push or respect the boundary. She paused. I pushed gently, and she talked for the last 20 minutes about something that had nothing to do with the clinical chart and everything to do with why she wasn't getting better. What did you do? I listened, and at the end I told her that what she'd said was going to be part of how I understood her care going forward, that it wasn't separate from the medicine. She turned the cup again. She cried. She apologized for crying. Did you tell her not to apologize? Victoria looked at him. I did. Like Sandra told you. Like Sandra told me. She held his gaze. Ethan, I think I'm going to be good at this. I know, he said. I don't mean as a performance. I mean, actually, I think I understand something about people that's going to be useful in this room. I know, he said again. You've known this whole time. Since you crouched down to Lily's level at the pumpkin farm and knocked on 3 pumpkins with full seriousness, he said. I knew. She looked at him for a long moment across the diner table, this man who had driven 4 hours on a Friday to sit in a booth with bad lighting and eat a burger and listen to her talk about the work she'd spent 20 years getting to, and she thought about something she had been thinking about for several weeks, something that was not yet fully formed but was close enough to say. When I was at the company, she said, I used to think leadership was about knowing the answer, being the person in the room with the clearest picture of the situation. She paused. In medicine, it's different. The best thing you can do for a patient is not know the answer for them. It's help them understand the question well enough to live with whatever the answer is. She looked at the table. You already knew how to do that, before I did. You've been doing it with me since January of last year. He thought about that. I've been doing it with Lily for 8 years, he said. It transfers. Most things don't transfer, she said. That one does. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. They sat that way for a while, in the diner that neither of them would remember with any particular detail except the feeling of it. The specific quality of a Friday night when you have found the person and the distance is hard and also irrelevant in the way that distances become irrelevant once you've decided they are. The ring arrived in May. It had taken longer than it should have because Ethan had changed the specification twice, not because he was indecisive, but because he had been very specific about what he wanted, and the first version hadn't been right, and he'd said so directly, which the jeweler had apparently appreciated in the particular way that craftsmen appreciate clients who know what they're looking for. The final version was simple and exactly right, and he knew it was right because when he opened the box in the parking lot of the jewelry shop and looked at it, he thought, yes, that's the one, the same way he thought when he found the right part for a difficult repair. He drove to Harrington that weekend with the ring in his jacket pocket. He did not plan a moment for it. He did not arrange a setting. He gave it to her in the parking lot of the campus library on a Sunday afternoon, just took it out of his pocket while they were walking and held it out. And she stopped walking and looked at it, and then looked at him and said, You just had that in your pocket. For the drive up, he said, you drove 4 hours with an engagement ring in your jacket pocket. It seemed like the right time to give it to you. I didn't want to make a whole thing. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. You, she said, are constitutionally incapable of ceremony. Is that a problem? She took the ring. She put it on. She looked at it for a moment, at the simple band, the single stone, the exactness of it. And then she said, No, it's the opposite of a problem. He looked at the ring on her hand. She looked at it too. Around them, the campus was its Sunday afternoon self, students with backpacks, the distant sound of someone's music, the May afternoon doing its work on the trees. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They kept walking. The second year was different from the first in the way that second years of hard things are always different. The raw adjustment of the first year calcified into something more structural, something you could build on. The phone calls had a different quality. The visits, less frequent but longer when they happened, had a settled rhythm. He understood her schedule well enough to know which weeks were going to be difficult before she told him, and she understood his well enough to know when to ask about the garage and when to let it be background. Lily turned 9 and then 10 and continued her meteorological research with undiminished commitment, the notebooks filling up, the field observations becoming more sophisticated. She had started cross-referencing her local observations with national weather data, a project of her own invention that had apparently impressed her science teacher enough to mention it at a parent-teacher conference, which Ethan had relayed to Victoria, who had texted back, "She's going to need a graduate-level advisor before she's 12. To which Lily, when shown the message, had responded with the gravity of someone taking a realistic assessment under consideration. That seems about right. The second year also brought the moment Ethan had been half expecting and half dreading from the start. The moment where the distance and the difficulty and the sustained weight of an unconventional situation accumulated into something that needed to be addressed directly. It happened on a Tuesday in November, second year. A phone call, 11 at night, her voice carrying a quality that he identified before she said anything substantive, the compressed, controlled quality of someone who had been holding something for too long and was at the limit of the holding. "There's a residency opportunity," she said. "It came up this week. It's excellent. The program is extraordinary. The placement afterward would be significant. It's also not in Harrington." He waited. "It's across the country," she said. "West Coast. 18 months. Silence on both ends for a moment. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I want you to know that first. I've already made the decision. I'm not calling to discuss whether I should take it." "Then why are you calling?" "Because I'm angry," she said. "And I need to say that to you directly. I'm angry that this is the situation, that there's an opportunity I would have pursued without a second thought 2 years ago, and now it's not the right choice, and I know it's the right decision. I'm not second-guessing it. I'm just angry about the fact that it costs something." He let that sit for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you're not. I'm angry at the geometry of it, that the life I wanted has this friction, this structural friction, that comes from it being a real life with real people in it rather than an abstraction." A pause. "I'm not explaining this well." "You're explaining it fine," he said. "You're saying that loving people limits you, and that limitation costs something even when you'd pay it again." A long exhale. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's true," he said. "For both of us. That's what this is." "I know." Her voice had shifted slightly, the compression easing. "I know that. I just needed to say the angry part out loud before I could get to the part where I've accepted it. You could have told me you were angry when you called instead of the residency setup." "I know. I was building to it." Victoria. "What?" "You can just be angry. You don't have to construct a framework around it first." A pause. Then, with a quality that was almost a laugh, "That is extremely difficult for me." "I know," he said. "Work on it." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, the ambient sound of her apartment in Harrington, the building, the street below, the small sounds of a life in a place that was temporary and had been lived in as if it knew that about itself. "I'm going to be done in 8 months, she said. 8 months and I come home." "I know. I need you to know that I know what home means, that it's not abstract to me, that when I say I'm coming back, I mean a specific place with a specific person and a specific kitchen table and a child who has better cloud knowledge than most adults I know." "She's going to show you the new notebooks," he said. "Fair warning, there are 7 of them. I want to see all 7. She'll require a full briefing session. I'm scheduling it in." A pause. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "Thank you for not making me feel bad about the angry part." "You're allowed the angry part," he said. "You're allowed all the parts. That's the whole point." She was quiet again, in the good way now, the settled way, the way of someone who has said what needed saying and is now in the space after. 8 months, she said. 8 months, he agreed. They hung up. He sat on the couch in the quiet of the Millhaven house, the November dark outside, the particular stillness of a Tuesday night in a small town where most of the lights were already off. He thought about what she'd said, about the geometry of loving people, about the friction of a real life versus an abstraction. He thought about it from his own side, the parallel version of it that he carried in a way he didn't often examine directly. The nights when the house was too quiet in the specific way, the weekends when something happened with Lily that he wanted to share in real time and couldn't, the particular effort of being the present parent, the there one, consistently and completely, while also being a man who was genuinely in love with someone 4 hours away and carrying that alongside everything else. He had never called it a sacrifice. He resisted that word on principle, because sacrifice implied a ledger, and a ledger implied debt, and he had decided a long time ago that love wasn't a debt instrument. But it cost. It cost real things, real days, real moments. He knew that. He had always known that. He had chosen it knowing it, and he would choose it again, and none of that made the cost less real. That was the honest version. That was the human version. The part that didn't get said because it didn't need saying, but that was true underneath everything that did. 8 months passed the way sustained difficult things pass. Not quickly, not slowly, just incrementally, 1 week at a time, one Thursday call at a time, one visit at a time. He didn't count days. He had learned early that counting days made time feel like a sentence rather than a passage. He just moved through it, kept the shop running, kept Lily's life steady, kept the calls and the visits and the thread of the thing maintained with both hands. The graduation was in July. He drove up with Lily and Darnell and Sandra. Sandra had insisted on attending, and Ethan hadn't argued because Sandra's instincts were, as far as he could tell, consistently correct. Eleanor made the drive herself, with Clara navigating and the recovery plan well in hand. Eleanor's health had been more stable over the past year than it had been in several, a fact that her doctors attributed to the care restructure, and that Eleanor attributed quietly and privately to having something to look forward to. Clara's boyfriend of 3 years had become Clara's fiancé of 2 months and was therefore at full Ashford family event attendant status, which he was handling with the improved composure of a man who had realized the learning curve was finite, if steep. They arrived at the university campus on a warm July morning, parking in the overflow lot and walking to the auditorium in a loose group. Sandra and Eleanor had immediately found common ground in a way that suggested they had been destined to know each other. Darnell and Clara's fiancé were discussing something automotive that Clara was pretending not to find charming, and Lily walked beside Ethan with her hands in her dress pockets and her eyes moving across everything with the particular attention of a child in an unfamiliar place. "It's big," Lily said, about the campus. "It is," he said. "Is this where she's been all this time?" "This is where she's been." Lily looked at the buildings, the trees, the other families arriving. "It looks like it was worth it," she said. He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "It looks serious," she said, "like the kind of place where they don't let you in unless you're actually going to try." She looked at him. "She tried." "She did," he said. Lily appeared satisfied with this assessment and returned to observing the campus. He watched her and thought about what she had just said, about trying in serious places and being worth it. He thought about the kid she had been when this started, 7, with a missing tooth and a cloud book on the kitchen table, and the kid she was now, 10, with 7 notebooks of field observations and an understanding of mesocyclones that genuinely exceeded his, and the kid she was becoming that neither of them could fully see yet. He thought about what Victoria had been at the pumpkin farm and what she was now, what the distance and the difficulty and the actual sustained use of herself had produced. He thought about all the people in the auditorium around him and what it had cost each of them to be there, the specific invisible price of every good thing. The ceremony was long, as ceremonies are. Names called, degrees conferred, the institutional language of achievement performed in the way institutions perform it, with dignity and some repetitiveness. Ethan sat between Lily and Eleanor and watched the stage, and when Victoria's name was called, Victoria Marie Ashford, Doctor of Medicine, he heard Eleanor make a sound beside him that was very small and very complete, the sound of a thing that has been hoped for long enough that its arrival is almost difficult to believe. Lily stood up. She was the only person in their row who stood immediately, without consultation or ceremony, just stood up and clapped with the full-body commitment of someone who has been waiting for this specifically and is not going to underperform it. Ethan stood. Darnell stood. Sandra stood. Clara stood, grabbing her fiancé's arm. Eleanor remained seated. She was 63, and her knees were not in agreement with standing ovations, but she put both hands together and clapped with the same full commitment Lily had brought, her eyes very bright. On the stage, Victoria crossed to receive her diploma. She shook the dean's hand. She looked out at the auditorium in the way graduates look, scanning, searching, and then she found them, found the cluster of familiar faces in the fourth row of the family section, found Lily standing up with her arms over her head, and something happened on her face that Ethan saw from 30 yards away and would not forget. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was deeper than that. It was the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they have been walking toward for a very long time and is standing at the threshold of it, and understanding fully what it cost and what it gave, and that both of those things are real and neither cancels the other. She walked off the stage. After the ceremony, in the courtyard outside, the crowd separated into its component families. Photographs, embraces, the particular chaos of an outdoor gathering in July. Victoria came through the glass doors in her gown and cap and walked directly to Eleanor first, which was right, which was the right thing. Ethan watched Eleanor take her daughter's face in both hands, the same gesture she had given him at Christmas, the same language, and say something that he couldn't hear and that was not for him to hear. Then Clara, who was openly crying and not managing it at all, which for Clara was a form of full surrender and which Victoria appeared to understand and allow. Then Darnell, who shook her hand and said something brief that made her laugh, the real one. Then Sandra, who held both her hands and spoke quietly to her for a moment, and whom Victoria looked at with the expression of someone receiving something they needed. Then she was in front of Lily. Lily was very serious. She had her hands clasped in front of her and her chin slightly up, and her expression was the one she wore when something required her full gravitas. "Dr. Ashford," she said. Victoria looked at her. Her voice, when it came, had a particular fragility, controlled but only just. "Hey, Lily. You did it?" "I did." "I knew you would." Lily said it as a fact, not a comfort, the way she said true things. "I told my class you were in medical school. They asked if you were going to be our doctor. I said maybe." A pause. "Can you be our doctor?" Victoria pressed her lips together very hard for a moment. "I'm going to try to make that happen," she said. Lily nodded once, conclusive. Then she stepped forward and hugged her. Not the careful hug of a child being gentle, but a real hug. Both arms, the kind that a 10-year-old deploys when they mean it entirely. Victoria hugged her back with equal completeness, her eyes closed, her chin on the top of Lily's head, and she stood there in the July courtyard in her graduation gown and did not try to stop what was happening in her face. Then there was only Ethan. She looked at him. He looked at her. The courtyard was full of noise and movement and families and July heat, and none of it was particularly relevant. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. The same as April, the diner parking lot, the motel, the phone calls. Just the word. Just the whole thing in one word. He put his arms around her. She put her face against his neck and stood there for a moment. Just stood, just breathed, just allowed herself the full weight of arriving somewhere after a very long walk. He held her with both arms, solidly, without performance. He was not going to tell her he was proud of her. She knew that. She didn't need to hear it from him to know it. What she needed was this, the physical fact of him, the presence of the person who had stood at the door and said, "Go," and then had been there, reliably, consistently, without resentment, for every month of the going. He felt her exhale, a long, complete exhale, the kind that carries something out of the body when it leaves. "I'm home," she said, quietly, just to him. "Not yet," he said, "but almost." She pulled back and looked at him. He smiled, the real one, the private one that wasn't for anyone else in the courtyard. She saw it, and her face did the thing it did when he said something true in the plainest possible way. "Almost as good enough for today," she said. "Almost as great," he said. They were married in September at Eleanor's house on a Saturday that cooperated with the weather in a way that September sometimes does. Warm without being hot, clear without being harsh, the light at the particular angle of a late summer afternoon that makes everything it touches look like it's being remembered rather than experienced. The maple in Eleanor's yard had started its early turn at the tips, the same showing-off quality as the maple at the garage, and Lily noticed this and pointed it out to Darnell before the ceremony started. The two of them standing in the yard looking up at it with the comfortable companionship of people who have been friends across a significant age gap for a long time. It was not a large wedding. It was the size of the people who mattered, which turned out to be about 40, which was the right number for a ceremony that wasn't performing anything to anyone, but was simply marking a thing that was true. Ethan stood at the end of the garden path in a dark suit that fit better than the one from the gala 3 years ago. He'd had this one made, a fact he hadn't mentioned to anyone, because it wasn't anyone else's business, and because the only opinion about it that mattered had been delivered when Victoria had seen him in it that morning and said, "Okay, I see why people make suits." He watched her come down the path. She was not in white. She had decided against white, with the reasoning that white was a convention, and she had never been particularly attached to conventions that didn't serve a purpose, and had chosen instead a dress the color of winter cream, simple and exactly right. Eleanor had done her hair, which Ethan only knew because Eleanor had mentioned it, and which had apparently required a negotiation about appropriate formality that Clara had mediated. She carried no flowers. She had decided against flowers with the same reasoning she decided against things. She walked alone, which had been her choice, because there was no one she wanted to be given away by, and the concept of giving away had never sat right with her. And because she was a woman who was very clear about the difference between walking toward something and being delivered to it. She walked toward him. He watched her come, and he thought about a dinner table in October 3 years ago, and a dare from a woman who had correctly identified that her sister needed someone to push her toward the door. He thought about a sparkling water and a bookshelf and the first honest conversation he'd had with someone in a long time. He thought about a December kitchen and a text at 10 at night and the decision to be in it, not halfway. He thought about a letter in a jacket pocket and a conversation at a kitchen table and the hardest thing he'd done. Not the big dramatic hard things, not the grief and the loss and the years alone, but the specific intimate hard thing of loving someone enough to mean it when you said go. She reached him. She looked at him. "You cut it again," she said quietly, looking at his hair. "Lily had opinions," he said. "Good ones or bad ones?" She said I looked appropriate for the occasion. Victoria's mouth curved. "High praise." "Highest," he said. The ceremony was conducted by a judge who had known Eleanor for 20 years and who spoke plainly and without excess flourish, which was exactly what both of them had asked for. The vows were their own. They had written them separately and not shared them in advance, both arriving at something that was specific and personal and not borrowed from anyone else's language. Ethan said, "I'm not going to promise you easy, because easy would be a lie. And you know it, and I know it. I'm going to promise you present, completely, consistently, without hedging. I'm going to promise you that I'll say the true thing when it needs saying, and I'll let you say it back, and I'll listen to the answer even when it's hard. I'm going to promise you that I will never ask you to be smaller than you are to fit the space I've made for you. And I'm going to promise that whatever comes, whatever the geometry of it looks like, I'll be standing in it with you." Victoria said, "I spent a long time believing that love meant sacrifice. That if you loved someone, you arranged yourself around their needs and called that devotion. I know now that's not love. That's management. What you gave me was something I didn't have language for until recently. You made space for me to become who I was supposed to be, and then you waited, and that waiting was the most active, most deliberate, most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. I promise to do the same for you, not the sacrifice version, the real version. The one where we're both whole and we choose each other from that wholeness every day, because choosing is what makes it real." Lily, in the front row between Darnell and Sandra, had her hands folded in her lap, and her expression was the gravest it had been all day. The expression of someone attending to something important. When the judge pronounced them married, she nodded once, the same conclusive nod she deployed when something confirmed what she had already determined. Then she stood up and clapped, and Darnell stood, and Sandra stood, and Clara was already crying, and Eleanor sat very still with her eyes very bright and did not wipe them. The reception was in Eleanor's garden, strung with lights that came on as the afternoon went into evening, and it had the quality of all good gatherings. Not perfect, not without the small complications of 40 people in a garden on a September evening, but real. The food was uneven in the way of catered events that try to accommodate everyone. Clara's speech was too long and also very funny, and also eventually made everyone in the garden cry, which Clara appeared to consider a professional success. Darnell danced with Sandra in the way of two people who have been dancing together for 11 years and have stopped caring about whether they're doing it right. Lily danced with Eleanor. That was the thing Ethan saw from across the garden and would hold for a long time afterward. His daughter and this woman, 63 and 10, moving together in the easy way of two people who have spent enough time together to have developed their own private understanding. Eleanor had taught Lily 3 card games over the past year, a fact that had emerged gradually from Lily's Thursday calls with Victoria. Lily had sent Eleanor meteorological field reports by mail, actual paper mail, because Eleanor had mentioned once that she preferred letters, and Lily had apparently taken this very seriously. They had built something, these two, without anyone orchestrating it, just the natural accumulation of shared attention and time. He watched them and thought about the things you couldn't plan, the connections that form in the margins of the life you're intentionally building, the relationships that arrive as byproducts of other relationships and turn out to be their own complete thing. He thought about Darnell, who had brought him to a dinner party with the transparent agenda of a man who had decided his friend needed something and was going to provide it whether asked or not. He thought about Eleanor, who had called him on the phone and asked what he saw when he looked at her daughter, and who had been preparing the second nurse for 6 weeks before anyone asked her to. He thought about Clara, who had issued a dare at a dinner table because sometimes love is direct and specific and slightly embarrassing, and that's what it takes. He thought about his father. He did this often and more comfortably now than he used to. The grief had settled into something he could look at directly rather than around. He thought about Robert Calloway standing in the doorway of the garage in the morning with his coffee, taking the measure of the day. He thought about what his father would have made of this particular September evening, this garden, this gathering, this woman beside him in the cream-colored dress talking to Marcus Chen about something that was making Marcus laugh in the way he rarely laughed. He would have given her a hard time. Of course he would have. He would have found her a worthy opponent and told her so eventually, after sufficient testing. He would have liked the soup question and the casserole and the fact that she had driven to Mill Haven in jeans and walked Main Street with her hair down and asked real questions about the shop. He would have told Ethan, in the private way he told things, that the woman had substance. And then he would have gone back to whatever he was doing and let the compliment stand without embellishment. Victoria appeared at his elbow with a glass of wine and the slightly tired, slightly luminous look of someone at the end of a day that has required a great deal and given a great deal. "Your mechanic is trying to teach Clara to waltz," she said. "Darnell doesn't know how to waltz." "That appears to be the problem, yes." He looked over at the makeshift dance floor, Darnell demonstrating something with great confidence that bore no particular resemblance to a waltz, Clara attempting to follow with the competitive commitment of someone who is not going to be the one to admit it isn't working. "I'll let it develop," he said. She looked out at the garden, at the lights coming on in the September evening, at Eleanor and Lily now seated together at one of the tables. Lily apparently showing Eleanor something in one of the notebooks she had brought because she was 10 and this was what she did. At all the familiar faces of people who had arrived at this garden through their own complicated routes and were here now, together, in this specific light. "My father would have liked this," she said. "I know," he said. "He would have had opinions about the catering." "Everyone has opinions about catering. His would have been specific and delivered before anyone asked." She looked at her wine glass. "I think he would have understood why I went, why I needed to go." A pause. "I don't know if he would have said it, but I think he would have understood." "I think so too," he said. "I wish he'd had the chance to," she said, simply. Not with drama, just with the plain weight of something true that couldn't be changed. "I wish a lot of people had the chance to say the true thing before the time ran out." He thought about that. He thought about all the unsaid things in the world, all the conversations that ran out of time before they ran out of content, all the true things that got carried forever because the moment passed. He thought about his father and the things he would have said given more time, and about Harrison Ashford and the one sentence he had managed. I know that's not the only thing you would have been excellent at. And the way a single true sentence said plainly and too late could still be enough to carry. That's why you say it when you can, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. He took her hand. She held it. The garden went on around them. Darnell's waltz deteriorating with good humor, Lily's notebooks, the September evening becoming September night, the lights strung in Eleanor's trees doing their quiet, steady work. He thought about something that had been forming in him for a long time, since before this evening, since before the graduation, since the early months when the distance was new and hard, and he was getting through it 1 week at a time. He thought about what he would say if someone asked him what he'd learned. Not the lessons of a self-help book, not the clean packaged wisdom of someone who has arrived somewhere safely and is now dispensing advice about the route. Just the actual thing. The real thing he had learned in the particular school of this particular life. What he had learned was this, that love is not the feeling. The feeling is the beginning of it, the door you walk through. Love is what happens after the door. The decision, renewed daily, to be present and honest, and to resist the very human instinct to make the other person smaller so you can feel bigger. To resist the instinct to hold on so tightly that you crush the thing you're holding. To resist the comfort of a love that keeps someone where you can see them instead of where they need to be. He had learned that the hardest version of love and the best version are the same version, that they are not separate paths that look similar at the start. They are one path, and the difficulty is the thing, not an obstacle to it. That a love that costs nothing has probably not been tested yet, and a love that has been tested and held is worth the exact amount it costs to hold it. He had learned that people need to be told the true thing plainly, and that they almost never are, and that when you do it, when you find the courage for the plain true thing without wrapping it in a production, it lands the way it needs to land, and the person receiving it knows the difference. He had learned from his daughter that you are allowed to be sad about things that are also good, that these are not opposing emotional states, that a human life is not a logic problem and should not be managed like one. He had learned from his father that showing up completely is the most important thing. Not perfectly, completely. With both hands, without hedging, without the exit ramp of a prepared failure. And he had learned from this woman beside him in this garden on this September evening that the people who love you best are the ones who see who you are supposed to become and make space for the becoming, even when the space costs them something. Even when the space means distance and difficulty and long nights and phone calls that aren't enough and visits that are over before they begin. They make the space because they have understood something fundamental, that keeping someone close is not the same as loving them. That the closing of the distance is not the love. The love is what survives the distance. The love is what's still there when the long walk is over and the person comes home. Lily found them at the edge of the garden as the evening deepened. She had her notebook under one arm and her dress shoes on, but she had taken her socks off at some point, an executive decision she had clearly made and not announced. Eleanor says it's going to be a clear night, she said. Good for stars. She said I could use the garden telescope if I'm careful. Are you always careful? Victoria asked. Lily considered this with genuine honesty. Usually, she said, about things that matter. Go ahead, Ethan said. She disappeared into the garden in the direction of the telescope. Somewhere nearby, Darnell's waltz had resolved into something that was not a waltz, but that Clara had apparently decided to accept. Sandra was talking to Marcus Chen with the comfortable attention of two people who have discovered unexpected common ground. Eleanor was watching Lily from her seat with the expression of someone who has more time now than she expected and is using it as it deserves to be used. Victoria leaned against Ethan's shoulder. He put his arm around her. The September night was settling in. The lights in the trees, the garden going to its evening self, the small, particular sounds of people they loved occupying the space around them. In some direction, invisible from where they stood but 4 hours in a season and a long, complicated, beautiful year away, a garage sat on the eastern edge of a small town with a sign in black letters on a white background. Straight now. All the letters level, the name on it belonging to a man who had fixed things. Not because he was paid to, but because broken things bothered him on a personal level and had passed that down to his son the same way he passed down his jaw and his stubbornness, quietly, without ceremony, as if it were simply part of the air in the building. Lily's voice came from across the garden. "I can see Jupiter." "Tell me what you see," Victoria called back. "It's small," Lily called, "but it's there." Ethan looked up. The September sky above Eleanor's garden was doing what September skies do when the light goes, opening up, going deeper, the stars arriving one by one in the particular order they always arrive. He looked at the sky and he thought, small, but there. He thought about the things in his life that were small but there. The cracked kitchen table, the garage door that stuck in January, the Little League sticker on the rear window of his truck that his daughter had put there 5 years ago and that he would never take down. Small things, constant things, the things that are there every day without announcement, that form the actual texture of a life, that outlast the dramatic moments and the grand decisions and the hard years and remain. He held this woman. She held him back. The night went on around them. And this is the part where the story could end with some large true statement about love, some summary that wraps the meaning in a bow and delivers it. But that's not how lives work. And this has been a story about how lives actually work, imperfectly, at cost, with difficulty, with the frequent absence of bow and the persistent presence of effort. The meaning isn't at the end. The meaning is in all of it. It's in the dare at the dinner table and the casserole with the wrong cheese and the letter in the jacket pocket. It's in the long drives and the Thursday phone calls and the night Ethan sat on the couch after she left and was sad about something that was also good. It's in what Eleanor said with her hands on his face, and what Lily said about clouds that know but don't say anything, and what Victoria said on the day she sent the letter back. Done. Sent. The meaning is, real love is not a feeling that makes things easy. It is a decision made again and again to stay present and honest in the difficulty, to see who someone is supposed to become and build the space for it, even when the building costs you. To wait for them to come home not with resentment, but with the particular open-handed patience of someone who understands that the waiting is its own form of love, not the lesser form, not the substitute, but the real thing, practiced in the real conditions of a real life. That is what it is. That is what it takes. And they did it.